Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. People in Marvel. Sign in at the beginning of God-level perception. Chapter 61. Look this way, please. For an explosive news, the reporters in the beautiful country have always been brave enough to die. What's more, now that the fighting situation has subsided, in an instant, they surrounded them from all directions. Facing the long guns and short cannons in front of him, Chen Yun only felt that it was more terrifying than fighting a lizard man. Hi Batman, we are the Daily Bugle. What do you think of the events of this evening? You saved New York, do you have anything to say about that? As soon as they came up, the reporters from the Bugle Daily squeezed to the front, put the microphone near Chen Yun's mouth, and uttered beautiful words desperately. Haven't they been smearing heroes all the time, are they against us? Seeing the Daily Bugle turning into a dog licking, Peter muttered unhappily. Maybe it's because. Tony smiled wryly and pointed at Chen Yun's face, if you can be this handsome even if you take off your mask. It's not fair. Facing the reporter's question, Chen Yun just nodded towards the camera and waved his hand. But how could the reporters let go of tonight's protagonist, not to mention, Chen Yun is so handsome. You became the first superhero in the United States in modern history, and that's quite a feat. Listening to the reporter from the Daily Bugle, Peter felt his acid water was about to come out. He desperately punishes the evil and promotes the good in New York, but in the end he just gets a naughty cuz man in the newspaper. Title. Chen Yun, on the other hand, won the praise of the media without any effort. This face-seeking world is really heartbreaking. But what Peter didn't expect was Captain America Steve is a superhero supported by the older generation. Iron Man Tony Stark, playboy and super rich, is the ultimate teenage dream. As for the Black Widow Natasha, she is fair and beautiful with long legs, and is the dream lover of many people. And his Spider-Man, who can be seen as a teenager at a glance, has fulfilled the dreams of children. As for Chen Yun, this powerful and handsome superhero, it is someone who can kill young and old, who can carry the banner of a new generation of superheroes. It is very normal to get the favor of the media. Have you considered debuting? After all, you are so handsome. Listen, this question. The reporter's words had left everyone present speechless. They glanced at the densely packed reporters in front of Chen Yun, and then looked at the 2 or 3 tabloids around them. Captain America is back from the dead, Iron Man is the super-rich Tony Stark, Natasha is fair and beautiful, and Spider-Man is punishing good and promoting evil. These topics that should have ignited the audience have been completely attracted by Chen Yun alone. This press conference is over. Tony smiled wryly and shook his head, then led the others out of the scene. He originally planned to show off, but now he just wants to find a bar to have a drink. Mazefakel, Chen, today is really hard. When the packing was ready and Chen Yun was about to go home, Nick Fury's call came right away. In the headquarters of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury is still at a loss as to the cause and end of this incident. After a few simple explanations, Chen Yun said everything he knew. I will hand over tonight's matter to Maria Hill. In addition, I have sent Coulson and Hawkeye Button to deal with the aftermath. After listening to Chen Yun's words, Nick Fury touched his bald head, and then asked, is there anything else you need? I just want to lie in bed and sleep now. Well, then you should go to bed early. By the way, because of the perfect resolution of this incident, your agent level has been unanimously agreed by the counselors, and you have become the first 10th level agent in S.H.I.E.L.D. Rights and benefits will be the same as mine in the future. This is another upgrade. Hearing this news, Chen Yun finally regained his spirits. Unexpectedly, in such a short period of time, he had gained the same status as the Black Stewed Egg. Sure enough, strength is the most important thing. Realizing this, Chen Yun clenched his fist secretly, with a smile on his face. If you don't have strength, no matter how much you do, you won't be able to gain the approval of others, let alone any special authority. Bye, little boy. Goodbye, Chen. Boy, goodbye. With the sound of farewell, the superheroes left Queens one after another. But just when Chen Yun was about to go back, Tony stopped him. Chen, give me a ride. Sensing Tony's depressed mood, Chen Yun took him back to Marbury Coast through any door. On the coast in front of Tony's villa, the two sat down. Drive Ethan is dead. As soon as he sat down, Tony's expression dropped. His death was caused by the weapons made by the Stark Group. Luckily, I avenged him. Tony's gloomy expression made Chen Yun puzzled. He found that this flamboyant playboy had become more restrained after Dr. Ethan's death. Sighing, Tony returned home, took out the red wine and goblet, and filled the wine silently. Pepper and your girlfriend are in the house, do you want to go in? Thinking of those two difficult women, Chen Yun quickly shook his head and took the wine glass from Tony's hand. Why did your weapons end up in the hands of terrorists? Because, Obadiah. Seeing Chen Yun's puzzled expression, Tony explained in a low tone, Obadiah is in charge of the weapon department of the group. The weapons circulating on the black market must have something to do with him. What's more, after a pause, Tony narrowed his eyes and said, I went to the Middle East today, and I discovered the Jericho missile that was only produced half a month ago. These missiles are in the hands of the Ten Rings gang. Speaking of this, Tony gave a wry smile, then raised his glass to respect and said, this glass is for Ethan. Respect Ethan. Thinking of the scientist who shared weal and woe with Tony, Chen Yun also picked up the wine glass and drank the wine in the glass. Hey, that's not how you drink red wine. Seeing Chen Yun finish the red wine like a cow chewing peonies, Tony shook his head. But he didn't sneer like usual, instead he imitated Chen Yun and drank the wine in one gulp. Haha, that's how it should be. Shaking his head, Tony laughed and teased Chen Yun, did you know? You just drank a supercar in one gulp. What? Looking at the empty wine glass in his hand, Chen Yun's face froze, and he cursed, I don't even have a pickup right now. Glancing at the laughing Tony with an ugly face, Chen Yun was so annoyed that he reminded him in an unhappy tone, you should also be careful, you have exposed your identity tonight. Don't be killed like Ethan. Don't worry, my life is great. Tony looked up at the sky and sighed, I still have a lot to do. How is it possible? What is that? In Tony's sight, there was a sudden muffled sound in the sky. A meteorite flew over Tony's head with a sharp and piercing sound, dragging out a long white tail flame. What's that? Amidst Tony's shouts, Chen Yun could already see the whole picture of the meteorite. It looks like a huge bolide, with a dark blue surface, shining with a metallic luster under the moonlight, as if it is a piece of steel. Looking at the meteorite that suddenly appeared, Chen Yun was dumbfounded. Sharingan successfully evolved into a kaleidoscope, a 10th level agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Lucky halo. Connecting all the things together, Chen Yun guessed the truth about the appearance of this meteorite. It's going to fall on us. Seeing the meteorite coming straight towards his villa, Tony couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up with an ugly face, drove the steel suit straight into the sky, and rushed to the meteorite. Have you always been this brave? After complaining, Chen Yun quickly activated his Sharingan, Susanoo. Accompanied by the sound of drinking, a huge golden skull appeared behind Chen Yun. After summoning the golden skull, Chen Yun quickly looked up. I saw Tony galloping across the sky, and arrived at the only way for the meteorite in an instant. Warning, warning, it will collide with a meteorite in 2 seconds. Ignoring the warning sound from the AI system, Tony showed a stern look in his eyes. Jarvis, the thrusters are outputting at full power. Push the meteorite back. With a bang, Tony's hand just touched the meteorite, and there was a huge explosion. The entire battle suit was hit by the air wave generated by the explosion in an instant, and it became fragments in an instant, falling from midair to the ground. As for Tony Stark under the steel suit, he was already smashed into a puddle of flesh by the meteorite. How many times is this the first time? Chen Yun shook his head with Tony's playful personality. A time traveler's pocket watch. Using his ability, Chen Yun set the time back to 5 minutes ago. Did you know? You just drank a supercar in one gulp. I know, and I know you're going to die soon. Why not travel back a little more? Regrettably throwing away the wine glass, Chen Yun grabbed Tony. Summoning any door, the two disappeared in the same place in an instant. Where did those two go? In Tony's villa, looking through the glass at the two who suddenly disappeared, Zhao Shiren was puzzled. I think, curling his lips, Pepper said in disgust, they must be fooling around. Chen Yun is not that kind of person. Zhao Shiren shook his head, and said firmly, he can't fool around. He's so young and so handsome. Pepper sighed, looked at Zhao Shiren and said seriously, if you don't do it sooner, you won't regret it in the future. Hearing Pepper's slightly ambiguous words, Zhao Shiren blushed and lowered her head. Why are we here? Looking at the wilderness and no man's land in front of him, Tony asked suspiciously, besides, why did you summon this thing? To save your life. Chen Yun quickly turned off the terrifying aura of luck, and summoned the golden skull again. When did you save my life? Tony looked at Chen Yun in bewilderment, and just about to say something, there was a muffled sound above his head. Looking up, a meteorite was falling fast towards them. What's that? Under Tony's shocked gaze, Chen Yun kicked his feet hard on the ground, and his whole body shot into the sky like an arrow from the string. The golden skull behind him also opened his hands in an instant, rushing towards the meteorite. Boom! The collision between the golden skull and the meteorite produced a violent explosion, and the powerful shock wave directly blew the surrounding vegetation and branches within hundreds of meters away. Ah! Tony, who couldn't dodge in time, was swept upside down by the strong wind and smashed hard on a nearby tree. If he wasn't protected by the steel suit, he would have died on the spot. As for the golden skull facing the meteorite, the golden luster on its body quickly dimmed after being hit by the meteorite. The skeleton, which is countless times stronger than fine steel, is also full of cracks. But even so, it still grabbed the meteorite tightly, then dragged the meteorite and threw it to the ground. God, this is too strong. The performance of the golden skull catching the meteorite with his bare hands made Tony stunned. Casually making the golden skull disappear, Chen Yun let out a long breath. What the hell is this thing? After circling the meteorite twice, Chen Yun asked Tony suspiciously. Tony is also very curious. They discovered new elements on the last meteorite, so this one. With excitement, Tony released an infrared scanning beam to scan the meteorite. Oh my god! After a few seconds, Tony couldn't help but exclaimed, this is Zhenjin. Zhenjin. Seeing Tony's drastic change of expression, Chen Yun's mood also became agitated. If there is any metal in the Marvel world that can make people crazy, it must be Zhenjin. Vibranium is very rare and strong. Captain America Steve's famous shield is made of vibranium and other metals. These vibrating gold. You can even buy 3 Stark groups. Tony shouted excitedly, staring at the steaming meteorite, wishing he could pounce on it immediately. It's so valuable. Hearing Tony's words, Chen Yun couldn't bear it anymore. Although Zhenjin is indeed very valuable, Chen Yun never thought that it would be so valuable. Pity. Staring at the meteorite for a long time, Tony said with some regret, if you use vibranium to build a steel armor, although the defense will be strong, it will reduce the attack. Besides, Zhenjin can't conduct energy, and the armor will lose the ability to fly. It doesn't matter, as long as it's worth the money. Looking at the meteorite worth 3 Stark groups, Chen Yun's eyes lit up, wishing he could carry the meteorite back now. By the way, if you use vibration gold to forge 2 swords. Thinking of the weapons he often discarded, Chen Yun asked, is it not so easy to roll the blade? Of course can. Tony nodded, but soon said distressingly, but the cutting of Zhenjin is too troublesome. To cut such a large piece of meteorite, I need to go back and use my father's notes to study it first. Don't bother, just watch me. Hearing that there was a solution to the weapon's durability, Chen Yun immediately activated his ability. Under Tony's shocked gaze, he directly used his spatial ability to cut off a piece of vibration metal about the size of a book. Whoa, are you Jingle Cat? Tony was shocked. He had already witnessed too many supernatural powers in Chen Yun's body. If one day, Chen Yun suddenly announces that he has become the god of creation, Tony feels that he can accept it. I want a beautiful woman, can you make it for me? Tony stared at Chen Yun with burning eyes, as if expecting something. Forbidden words. Hey, why don't you let me talk? After the silence ended, Tony found Chen Yun immediately. Looking at his expression, it seemed that Chen Yun was about to bite someone without giving an explanation. If you don't want Pepper to know that you are looking for a beautiful woman, then shut up. Quote. Tony, who was grinning just now, silently made a zipper movement around his mouth. Stop talking nonsense, dig a hole. As before, Chen Yun and Tony chose to bury the huge vibrating meteorite underground. Using any door, the two returned to Marbury Coast. I'll go and research it first, please go ahead. In order to prevent Chen Yun from telling Pepper what happened, Tony found a reason and ran into the laboratory as soon as he returned to the villa. The speechless Chen Yun called Zhao Shiren back home. As soon as he got home, after repeated battles, Chen Yun, who had been exhausted for a long time, threw himself on the bed several meters in size, and soon fell asleep. Big Pig's Hoof. Looking at Chen Yun, Zhao Shiren blushed slightly, and gently covered Chen Yun with the quilt. While sleeping in a daze, Chen Yun seemed to hear the notification sound of the power refresh. But he didn't wake up, but continued to fight in his sleep. In this bizarre dream, a large number of aliens suddenly invaded the Earth. These aliens are very warlike and extremely brutal. Human beings are caught in a bitter battle, the whole society is completely chaotic, and the people on Earth are plunged into darkness. And Chen Yun led the superheroes to protect the Earth. After finally repelling these aliens, among the superheroes who originally fought side by side, a guy with a hammer and a giant green baby who's suddenly going crazy. In order to stop these two guys, the superheroes had to mobilize again after getting tired. Although the two still fell under Chen Yun's iron fist, they caused huge damage to other superheroes. Why can I dream of Thor Odinson in 2 consecutive dreams? At 6 o'clock in the morning, Chen Yun recalled the dream in the sleep prophecy spell suspiciously, and was dissatisfied with meeting Thor twice in a row. Why can't I dream of some valuable treasure? Friday, access the Shield admin page. After washing up, a refreshed Chen Yun was ready to exercise the authority of a 10th level agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. After logging into the backstage of this global organization, with the only 10th level agent authority, what Nick Fury, the Director General, can find out, Chen Yun can also find out. 3 uses of the Cosmic Rubik's Cube. Pegasus Project. A global energy strategy. Inhuman experiments of the Kree. Chen Yun was very excited to see these various files that could only be seen in movies and TV in the past. Excitedly, he clicked on these files, ready to take a good look. After entering, Chen Yun was surprised to find that most of the top-secret files in S.H.I.E.L.D., except for a name, were all empty. Take the Pegasus Project for example. This was the Kree invasion brought about by scientists' experiments. It was also the first time the Earth came into contact with aliens. However, there is no detailed description in the file except for a name. What's more, even the authority of the 10th level agent cannot enter. My 10th level agent, is it fake? Seeing that he was a 10th level agent, but could only inquire about trivial matters, Chen Yun was speechless. Forget it, let's take a look at the ability from last night. Chen Yun quickly lost interest in the secretive file, and he turned his attention to his own system. Automatic sign-in is successful. Congratulations to the host for getting today's ability. Don't ask, if you ask, your name is Zhang San. After reading last night's ability reminder, Chen Yun was completely depressed. Because he forgot to sign in at 12 o'clock and did not activate the Aura of Luck, Chen Yun's system automatically issued an ability. Don't ask, your name is Zhang San. Looking at this name, Chen Yun vaguely sensed that something was wrong. But what broke him down was that the effect of this ability was even more dumbfounding. It turned out to be able to change other people's names to Zhang San. Rename, Zhang San's pupil. During training, Chen Yun changed the name of his Sharingan on a whim. Before he could react, a subtle feeling swirled in his mind. He accepted this outrageous name with peace of mind, as if Zhang Sanjitong was his name. Zhang San, Amaterasu, I can't accept it. After training twice, Chen Yu changed his name back to Kaleidoscope Sharingan. Although under the influence of the ability, he can accept that the name was given by himself. But his aesthetics made him unbearable. After changing the name, Chen Yun continued to experiment with his abilities. Amaterasu. When he used Amaterasu again, a mass of black flames appeared out of thin air, before Chen Yun's eyes. After many times of training, Chen Yun has been able to control Amaterasu proficiently. And among them, Chen Yun also discovered the law of Amaterasu. Amaterasu's ability, attachment and space ability exist. This group of black flames that can burn everything is also transferred from a certain hidden space. Although the specific coordinates of this space cannot be distinguished for the time being, if it can be found. In the future, invincible enemies can be exiled to this space, and let them be burned by Amaterasu day and night. Not yet, doesn't mean it won't work in the future. Realizing that he had another goal to work on, Chen Yun was in a good mood, so he turned to study his left eye. Unlike Amaterasu in the right eye, the skill in the left eye is a magical skill in Hokage. Even in the late stage of Naruto's plot collapse, this skill can shine, and even turn the tide of the battle. Divine power. Chen Yun gave a low shout, and in an instant, a vase in front of him shattered into pieces, and then disappeared in front of Chen Yun out of thin air. Great! Chen Yun secretly praised the power of the gods. After a morning of training, Chen Yun was already able to skillfully use the power of divine power. He discovered that Shinwei also belongs to space ability. Where the eyes gaze, Kamui can create a vortex of a black hole. It can tear the enemy into shreds or drag it into the space of Shinwei. And this skill also has defensive ability. It allows Chen Yun to hide in his own space in an instant, so as to avoid being heard by the enemy. Of course, among the several abilities of Shinwei, what Chen Yun likes the most is the storage function that comes with Shinwei. Large space, take it with you. This is much more advanced than storage rings and storage bags. Knowing the function of Shinwei, Chen Yun immediately set off for the desert and no man's land, and dragged the new element meteorite and vibrating gold meteorite hidden underground into the Shinwei space. Money, only in your pocket is money. Divine power. In the desert, Chen Yun kept using Sharingan. He intends to use Kamui's black hole to teleport directly to Tony's basement. Although the use of this function is a bit troublesome, Chen Yun must first enter the world of Shinwei. Then after finding the destination, you need to use Shinwei again to open up the exit. However, in the face of pretense, a little trouble should be done. Divine power. When Chen Yun detected Tony's location, he immediately activated his skills. Then, Chen Yun disappeared in place. The next moment, Chen Yun suddenly appeared in front of Tony Stark with a black vortex. Chen, good morning. To Chen Yun's surprise, it seemed that Chen Yun had chosen the wrong person for his pretense. Tony with dark circles under his eyes and coffee in his hand. Looking at Chen Yun who suddenly appeared, he just greeted him calmly. Facing Chen Yun's new operation, Tony didn't feel any disturbance in his heart. No way, he's already used to it. Well, good morning. After failing to act coercively, Chen Yun responded with an embarrassing expression. Immediately, he changed the subject and asked Tony, I've already shipped 2 meteorites, where are you going to put them? At the same time, Chen Yun frowned at Tony's haggard appearance after staying up too late, admiring the Iron Man's superhuman energy in his heart. Wow, where did you put it? Looking at Chen Yun who was empty-handed in surprise, Tony teased, is it your magic pocket? After all, Tony ordered Jarvis, lower the entire living room. Yes, sir. In the next second, Chen Yun saw the floor of the entire room being slowly lowered. Soon, they came to the underground warehouse of the villa. Look, my Mark III. As soon as he arrived at the warehouse, Tony's tired face was flushed as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He led Chen Yun to a set of red and yellow steel armor, and introduced it to Chen Yun with a proud face. In just one night, my Mark III was successfully manufactured. Look at his chest and head, they are all filled with vibration gold materials. Knocking on the chest of the iron armor, Tony smiled proudly, now, its defense is no worse than Captain America's shield. And, speaking of this, Tony paused, and said in a mysterious tone, I even installed a secret weapon on Mark III. What secret weapon? Chen Yun asked suspiciously. He was also attracted by the gorgeous steel armor in front of him. Laser beam. Tony smiled and explained, this is not a laser like a toy before, it is a real powerful weapon. Speaking of it, I prefer to call it by its full name, high-intensity electromagnetic pulse laser beam. After displaying the new equipment triumphantly, Tony led Chen Yun to another place in the warehouse. Smiling mysteriously, Tony pressed a button. With a click, the wall at the corner of the warehouse slowly opened to both sides, revealing the contents. A set of black and gold armor appeared in front of Chen Yun. It was a form of armor that Chen Yun had never seen before, but no matter how you looked at it, it was full of coolness. While looking extremely powerful, the appearance of the armor reveals a hint of mystery, especially the prismatic substances on its back, which are simply like works of art. Behind the armor, there was even Chen Yun's favorite cloak. This suit of armor is much more handsome than the one I'm wearing. Seeing Chen Yun staring at the armor intently, Tony couldn't help but praise, the only pity is that it's still only a semi-finished product, more vibrating gold is needed to perfect it. Speaking of which, where did you hide the meteorite? After introducing the armor, Tony stared at Chen Yun and asked, "You won't really put it in the magic pocket, will you?" "Well, you should find a place first. Just put it there." Tony ran to the corner, pointed to the place where the helicopter was parked before and said, "I said, do you need to buy a helicopter too? I'm not used to the life of the rich yet." Chen Yun shrugged, and then aimed at the tarmac with divine power. A pitch-black vortex appeared out of thin air, and then 2 meteorites fell out of it. "Wow, your magic is really getting more and more advanced." Watching Chen Yun release the meteorite, Tony couldn't help but said with emotion, "Speaking of which, your methods are always beyond science." Regarding Chen Yun's ability of never being poor, Tony has already passed the stage of being confused, and now he is slowly getting used to it. "Need to be cut?" Pointing to the huge vibrating metal meteorite, Chen Yun asked. "No need." Tony waved his hand, and then said, "I've read the notebook my father left behind. This piece of vibrating gold can be treated with overfrequency vibration passivation or ultra-high temperature. Don't forget to call me if you need it." Chen Yun nodded, directly activated Shenwei and left the villa. This trick is really cool. Although there is no realization on the face, in fact, Tony's heart is very greedy for this trick. With a pushy personality, he is doomed to be irresistible to such cool things. When will we be able to use science to achieve this level? Sighing, Tony drank the rest of the coffee in one gulp and continued his research work. Continuous staying up late to work has already made Tony's face full of exhaustion. If Pepper was here, he would definitely be advised to rest. However, Pepper, who was entrusted to copy the hidden files in Obadiah's computer, would naturally not appear here. And when Pepper returned to the villa, Tony had completely collapsed. "I got the video of Obadiah's deal with the 10 rings. Raising his hand, Pepper rolled his eyes at Tony, who was slumped on the sofa. "Speaking of which, how long have you not rested?" After seeing the U-disc in Pepper's hand, Tony immediately regained his spirits. "Probably. Obadiah actually has a deal with the 10 Rings gang. Insert the USB flash drive into the computer, and the video of Obadiah's transaction with the 10 Rings immediately appeared on the computer screen. Only then did Tony find out that Obadiah had secretly communicated with the 10 Rings gang for the song. The fool. More than that, Pepper continued to release fierce news next. "I also found this, a bigger steel suit." Pepper operated a little on the computer, and a crude Iron Overlord armor appeared on the screen. "He actually stole my battle uniform. Where is he now? I'm going to kill him." Tony was about to explode, not to mention the secret deal with the 10 Rings. Obadiah, the vice president of the group, actually made a steel suit in private. When he and Obadiah fell apart, it was self-evident who this battle suit was going to deal with. "Are you sure you want to kill him?" Pepper's face was strange, and he hesitated to say, he should be at the police station now. Because of the crime of kidnapping by joint terrorists, he has now been arrested in the New York Police Department. "Haha, I want to find the best lawyer and sentence him to death." Hearing the news from Pepper, Tony immediately jumped up and shouted excitedly. But after venting, his expression began to calm down. Tony sighed and said in a low tone, "Let's keep him alive and inform the lawyer. Let Obadiah stay in prison forever." The latest news is that Mr. Obadiah, the vice president of the Stark Group, was arrested by the New York police for kidnapping with terrorists. According to police reports, Obadiah was also behind the attack on Tony Stark in the Middle East. In New Mexico, Chen Yun saw the news on TV. Obadiah is also unlucky. He didn't even drive the Iron Overlord before rushing to the street. Watching the news boredly, Chen Yun couldn't help but wonder why Coulson called him here. Except for a few extremely simple mobile homes on the construction site, it is a barren and inhabited grassland. Just as he was thinking, Coulson hurriedly pushed the door open and entered. "Fortunately, you finally came." Seeing Chen Yun, Coulson's expression obviously relaxed. "Come with me, I need your help with something." Chen Yun followed Coulson into a large room in a daze. Apart from Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the most eye-catching thing was a hammer placed on the ground. Thor's hammer. Seeing the hammer, Chen Yun immediately understood everything. After carefully observing the surroundings, he realized that he was standing on a huge impact crater. In the very center of the pit is a simple-looking hammer. This hammer has a gray square head with a short round handle wrapped in brown leather and a looped lanyard at the end of the handle. Judging from the shape of the impact crater, it seems that a hammer smashed a big hole in the ground. We've been researching for 2 days. Coulson rubbed the center of his brows wearily, and explained to Chen Yun, but we tried various methods, but we couldn't hold it. Mazefakel, this is the heaviest hammer I've ever seen. Nick Fury curled his lips, and also frowned. I guess it came from outside the Earth. Coulson and the others have experimented with trailers and large equipment, and this ghost thing still doesn't move. Putting on the blindfold, Nick Fury looked at Chen Yun. That's why I called you here. Looking at Thor's hammer slanted on the ground, Chen Yun's heart felt a little restless. Although in the later stage, Thor's hammer can be picked up by anyone. But now that the plot is starting, the buff that non-approved people of Thor's hammer can't pick up still makes him a little moved. Have you ever seen a tramp singer with long blonde hair in the neighborhood? But in the end, Chen Yun gave up on this idea. He turned to look at Coulson. It's a man. Man, there's no one here. Coulson shook his head in denial when an agent walked in. Report, we caught a sneaky man. He dresses like a mariachi singer. The agent paused, then continued with a strange expression. He also said, say he's the god of thunder in Norse mythology. Traveling singer. Mazefakel. Nick Fury and Coulson looked at Chen Yun in surprise, and after a few seconds of blankness, Coulson asked suspiciously, do you know anything? I just dreamed about. Chen Yun shrugged, and after seeing the puzzled expressions of the two, he had no choice but to explain, I have a supernatural ability, and I can predict through dreams. Pointing to the hammer on the ground, Chen Yun said, this hammer, as well as the wandering singer outside, have all appeared in my dreams. Like a psychic, Coulson muttered suspiciously. He was almost used to Chen Yun's endless new abilities. Of course not, let's go and see that wandering singer first. Hearing Chen Yun's proposal, the two who were still a little bit puzzled nodded. You were late, he has passed out. When a few people came outside the camp, Hawkeye Barden was cleaning his arrows. Seeing a few people, Barden pointed to the corner. Where is that person? Following Barden's guidance, Chen Yun saw a man who had fainted on the ground. That's right, it's him. Walking up to the man, he looked at Thor Odinson, who was dressed in fancy clothes and couldn't even beat Hawkeye without a hammer. Chen Yun said with certainty, he's that gay guy. Mazefakel. Nick Fury and Coulson looked at Chen Yun in bewilderment. What kind of prophecy is this, and they can even tell their orientation? In the dream, he was a passionate boss. Seeing the misunderstanding between the two, Chen Yun quickly explained, it's called gay for short. He was holding the hammer just now, wearing armor, and fighting a robot with glowing eyes. Are you joking? Hearing Chen Yun's words, Barden frowned and said, he's very weak, I didn't even use a bow just now. Before he picked up that hammer, he was really weak. Chen Yun explained to Barden with a smile. Is he really Thor? Coulson asked suspiciously, the god of thunder in the fairy tale. God, that's a group of aliens pretending to be ghosts. Nick Fury curled his lips in disdain and said that he, who is well informed, has no respect for these so-called gods. After all, Nick Fury silently looked at Chen Yun. I'm not an alien. Chen Yun waved his hand and explained speechlessly. Who's right? Nick Fury shrugged and said, you are so strong, if it is an alien, I can ask S.H.I.E.L.D. to make up a mythical background for you. While speaking, Nick Fury walked to the agent beside him. Go get a basin of water. Wow. Single quote. A basin of cold foot-washing water was poured directly on Thor's face. And the effect is naturally immediate. Cough, cough, bah. You natives, let me out quickly. Choking and coughing repeatedly, Thor got up from the ground. Wiping off the smelly water droplets on his face angrily, Thor breathed out the fragrance, indigenous. How dare you? How dare you do this to me? You fool. It seems that the image of a wandering singer really suits you. Glancing at the angry Thor, Nick Fury laughed loudly. You claim to be a wandering singer of God, and you broke in by yourself. What is a tramp singer? Thor looked at Nick Fury in a daze, but soon, he roared again, I didn't break in. You guys stole my hammer first. The hammer fell from the sky. Nick Fury said disdainfully, you said it was yours. Do you have a patent? Have you registered your brand? Patent, brand. Hearing these names, Thor was stunned. Indigenous. I can't understand what you're saying. But if you want to take my hammer away, I, Thor Odinson, god of thunder, I will definitely make you regret it. Seeing that Thor's anger value was about to explode, Hawkeye Barden walked up to him. After gesturing to Thor with his hand, Barden said with disdain, "God, you are weak, indigenous, claiming to be Thor, but defeated by mortals." Hawkeye Barden's words immediately made Thor embarrassed. He wanted to refute, but he didn't want to expose the fact that his divine power was sealed. In the end, Thor could only roar helplessly, "Native! You are trying to provoke a god. If you dare to say one more, Looking at Thor, who was jumping up and down after being silenced by himself, Chen Yun shook his head. "Such a god is really weak. You say you're Thor, can you set off an electric spark?" Looking at Thor, who finally calmed down, Chen Yun said jokingly, "Prove that I am a real god." "Electric spark? You let the great Thor set off an electric spark?" When Thor, who lifted the mute, heard this sentence, his anger value was maxed directly. Now he really wanted to summon a few thunderbolts from the sky, and teach the mortals in front of him a good lesson. But the fact that his divine power was banned made him no different from these natives. Let alone thunder, Thor couldn't even summon an electric spark. "That's right, as long as I get Thor's hammer, I can regain my divine power." In embarrassment, Thor remembered his hammer, and he said blankly, "I need my hammer. I swear, I won't use any power of lightning until I find the hammer." "You have the strength of a hammer now," Chen Yun complained in his heart, and then looked at Nick Fury. "Since he appeared in your dream, let him try." With the foreshadowing of Chen Yun's previous dream prophecy, Nick Fury and Coulson looked at each other and agreed to Thor's request. "Ha, as long as you get the hammer, you will meet a real god." Seeing that several people agreed, Thor boasted happily, "Although it is only a small part of my strength, it can also open the eyes of you natives. You'd better pick it up first and then talk about it." Such an inconspicuous god made Nick Fury's face darken in an instant, "And, you must promise not to harm the earth." "Don't worry, as long as I can get my weapon back, I will leave immediately." Thor patted his chest and promised, "I am a righteous god, and I will never hurt any natives." While speaking, several people arrived outside the room where Thor's hammer was placed. Chen Yun took the lead, opened the curtain and walked in first. The impatient Thor was even faster than Chen Yun. As soon as he entered the door, he bypassed Chen Yun in front of him, and ran towards Thor's hammer in the center of the field. Seeing Thor behave like this, after Nick Fury and Coulson glanced at each other, they also hurried to the hammer. "Hey, friend, I finally found you." Seeing his hammer, Thor's eyes turned red, and he said softly, "Come home with me, Mjolnir." Thor reached out to hold the hammer handle in his hand with an excited expression, and then raised his hand. Strangeness. After secretly exerting force for a long time, Thor was dumbfounded, the hammer in his hand did not move at all. "Sorry, the posture is a bit incorrect." Smiling awkwardly, Thor looked at his hammer with a solemn expression, then crossed his hands, holding Thor's hammer tightly. Get up, get up." Exhausting all the strength in his body, Thor let out a loud drink. But the hammer still lay there quietly, unresponsive. "Maybe it's because of the fainting just now that the blood circulation in my arm is not smooth." Thor continued to explain with a smirk, and then violently exerted force with his hands. This time, Thor used all his breastfeeding energy, his face flushed, and even turned into a sauce purple. The blue veins on both arms were exposed, as if they were about to burst at any moment. The whole person was sweating profusely as if all the water had been drained. But unfortunately, the hammer still didn't move. Mazefakel. Seeing this scene, Nick Fury, who had always had a dark face, said unhappily, "Are you a tramp singer here to be funny?" "Father, why on earth is this?" Thor was about to collapse, his divine power was sealed, and Thor's hammer could not be pulled out. Thinking of him as a majestic Thor, is he going to spend his whole life with the natives on the earth? "I cannot be reconciled." The loveless Thor let go of his hands and collapsed to the ground. Maybe it broke on the ground. Seeing Thor's decadent appearance, Chen Yun comforted, perhaps the fingerprint was not recognized. "Will not." He beat the ground bitterly, as if he was the smashed ground. "Mjolnir can't be broken. It's just that I'm not qualified to pick him up." "Is it because you forgot the password?" Chen Yun asked suspiciously. "No, it's not a password, only the righteous can lift it." Thor lay on the ground in frustration, but looked up to see Chen Yun, who was stretching out his hand to try. Oh, mortals, it is impossible for the natives to lift Mjolnir. With a sneer, Thor looked at Chen Yun with the eyes of a bumpkin, only the noble Protoss can lift. Before Thor finished speaking, he showed a stunned expression. Chen Yun easily picked up his Thor's hammer. This hammer is not heavy. Holding Thor's hammer in his hand, Chen Yun looked at Thor suspiciously. I turned the hammer left and right, but found that it had no weight at all. Following the usage in the movie, Chen Yun tentatively swung the hammer a few times, turning it into the shape of a windmill. Soon, there was a muffled thunder in the sky. This hammer can actually strike thunder. Hearing the thunder in his ears, Chen Yun couldn't help but exclaimed. How, possible, you mortal, how could you, raise Mjolnir? Seeing Chen Yun lift Mjolnir over his head, Thor roared, so shocked that he couldn't even speak clearly. Mazefakel. Nick Fury kept wandering his eyes on Chen Yun and Thor, and finally asked leisurely, are you guys acting? Chen, you can always surprise. Compared to Nick Fury, Coulson, who had tried various ways to move the hammer, was much more shocked. He shook his head and asked in confusion, how did you do it? Mjolnir must be broken. The Aborigine actually raised the weapon of the Protoss, which made Thor couldn't believe his eyes, but then he reacted and shouted angrily, it must have been broken when it fell to the ground. You just said it was impossible. Curling his lips, Chen Yun threw the hammer directly in front of Thor. He spread his hands and said innocently, how about, you try again? Father, give me strength. Piously meditating in his heart, Thor grabbed the hammer with a solemn expression. He took a few deep breaths, and began to exert force slowly and firmly. What? Accompanied by Thor's roar, the hammer remained motionless. How can that be? Successive failures, coupled with the fact that Chen Yun raised the hammer, made Thor start to doubt his life, and sat on the ground in a daze. Oh, he's heavy. Coulson also went up to try, but also failed. I have encountered such a weapon before. At this time, Nick Fury stood up, and he held the handle of the hammer with a relaxed expression. It is possible that the hammer does not need any shit qualifications. As long as you have love in your heart, you can pick it up. The next moment, in the crowd watching, Nick Fury's veins popped out. He clenched his teeth and pulled up with all his strength, so hard that his eyes almost popped out. However, the hammer remained motionless. Mazefakel. Why can you pick it up? Faced with such a result, Thor's mentality collapsed directly, and he simply couldn't accept, aren't you from Midgard? Are you a Protoss? Mazefakel. Hearing this name, Nick Fury's face was dark, and he questioned dissatisfiedly, are you taking drugs? What Midgardian? Nick Fury said aggressively, this is Earth. We are Earthlings. The Earth in your mouth is located in the atrium of the 9 realms. Seeing Nick Fury angry, Thor, who was afraid of losing his contact with the hammer, sighed and explained, like us Protoss, we all live on the world tree. And our name for Earth is Midgard. After finishing speaking, Thor's eyes suddenly lit up as if thinking of something, that's right. During the time period when ice giants invaded the Earth and brought the Earth into an ice age. My father Odin. Thor, who was trapped in memories, became more and more excited as he said, at that time, he once led an army to the Earth. At that time, thinking of this, Thor grabbed Chen Yun and said excitedly, I know why you can pick up Mjolnir. Chen Yun was staggered by Thor, and asked suspiciously, what did you say? Because people from Asgard came to Earth. Thor said urgently, you may be a descendant of Asgard. What? Chen Yun was stunned. He really wanted to open it and see what kind of structure this Thor's brain was. Inexplicably, he became a descendant of Asgard. However, although Thor's explanation was outrageous, it also made Chen Yun guess the reason why he was able to pick up the hammer. Wagyu immortal physique. The fairy body that can break all spells and confinement can naturally break the seal on the hammer. Without the seal, this hammer is nothing more than an object that can summon wind and rain, and attract thunder. Boy, it's really a pity for you to be Thor. Smacking his mouth, Nick Fury ruthlessly complained to the distraught Thor, such a big brain hole, you should write a novel. As soon as Nick Fury finished speaking, an agent rushed in a hurry. Boss, there are 2 women and an old man outside looking for their stupid son. After listening to the agent's report, the 3 of Chen Yun turned their attention to Tony, and looked at him suspiciously. I'm not crazy. Facing the questioning eyes of the triple pair, Tony retorted indignantly, I am the son of Odin. Thor. I know. Looking at Thor with a smile, Nick Fury showed a smile on his face. You can explain it when the doctor slices you. Slice. Tormund, in order not to be studied. He sighed, and sat down on the ground decadently. I'm not Thor, I'm a psycho. Then you need to see a doctor. Nick Fury laughed even happier, and immediately shouted to the outside, come here, send this son of Odin, Mr. Thor, to heal. I'm really crazy. Thor was terrified, struggling desperately under the control of several agents. Don't take me away. I'm really sick. Woo, woo. Stuffing the glove into Thor's mouth, Hawkeye Barton looked at Thor, who was yelling in disgust. Holding Thor by the neck, who was still resisting, Barton ruthlessly dragged the god away. Is it really okay to scare him like this? After Thor disappeared from the room, Coulson asked with a frown. I didn't mean to scare him. Nick Fury rubbed his forehead in distress, and said in an unhappy tone, but this Thor, what he said may be true. Aliens from Mazefaker. After cursing, Nick Fury explained, as long as one of these aliens appears, they will definitely attract a bunch of them. To avoid trouble, we need to mobilize agents to look him up. After clapping his hands, Nick Fury said with a relaxed expression, compared to the trouble he caused, we just want a little blood from him. By the way, can you Mazefakel put the hammer down? After explaining, Nick Fury looked at Chen Yun, who was throwing Thor's hammer with black lines all over his face. Don't you think there is a lot of thunder outside? Sao Rui, I kind of like this hammer. Putting the hammer in the palm of his hand, Chen Yun continued to talk about his dream, except Thor and his hammer. A huge robot also appeared in the dream. Compared with what Chen Yun saw in the dream, the Asgard robot in the movie is simply weaker. Not to mention the aura of the strongest robot, it was easily solved by the playful Thor. Comparing the two, it is simply a world of difference. Thinking of this, Chen Yun specially reminded, that robot is much more powerful than Tony's Mark armor. Moreover, they also have a technology that can come to Earth in an instant. That should be the Rainbow Bridge of Asgard. Nick Fury pondered for a while before continuing to say, this technology can be found in the information of S.H.I.E.L.D. Those aliens have come to Earth like this before. After explaining, Nick Fury said to Chen Yun, who continued to play Thor's hammer, be careful not to hit your feet. Touching his bald head, Nick Fury asked again, is this thing safe in the S.H.I.E.L.D. safe? Safe. Chen Yun smiled playfully, raised his eyebrows, and his body disappeared in an instant. But within a few seconds, Chen Yun reappeared on the same spot, holding a glowing cube in his hand. Shrugging, Chen Yun jokingly said, this thing can be placed in my manor for lighting. My god, Mazefakel. When Chen Yun appeared with this thing, the hearts of both Nick Fury and Coulson almost stopped suddenly. Put this thing back in the safe. Nick Fury looked at the cube in panic, and warned Chen Yundao, it's very corrosive. What is it? I can feel the great energy in it. Chen Yun shook the cube in his hand. This cosmic Rubik's Cube claims to be able to open the door of space and move instantly in the universe. It was simply the Pro Max version of his own teleportation ability, and sensing the huge energy in it, Chen Yun couldn't help being curious about its origin. The name of this thing is the Cosmic Rubik's Cube. Looking at Chen Yun, who was getting more and more detached, Nick Fury couldn't help but hold his forehead and said, it's definitely not for lighting. It is. Just as Nick Fury was about to explain, the emergency phone in his arms rang. Boss, 10 major events. On the other end of the phone was the anxious voice of the agent. Our Rubik's Cube has been stolen. The appearance of that person is... ... Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Nick Fury was speechless. Such a powerful energy, actually put it in the safe as a light bulb. After shaking the Rubik's Cube in his hand, Chen Yun joked with a smile, isn't it a bit wasteful? Of course we're not going to use it as a light bulb. Nick Fury hesitated for a while, and explained helplessly, this was originally a secret, but since you have become a 10th level agent, the Bureau is currently developing a super powerful laser weapon. Pointing to the Rubik's Cube in Chen Yun's hand, Nick Fury continued, it is the most important research material. Didn't the laser weapon be made by the Red Skull during World War II? Putting the Rubik's Cube in the palm of his hand, Chen Yun asked suspiciously, why do we have to do it? Because there are more and more perverts. Taking a peek at Chen Yun, Nick Fury explained, I originally planned to build a heroic agent team. The plan for this laser weapon was proposed by Pierce through Parliament. Pierce, I don't have a good impression of him. Chen Yun thought for a while, and immediately thought of the man he met when he came to S.H.I.E.L.D. for the first time. He curled his lips. Besides, that guy is a bit repulsive to newcomers. Are you mistaken? Hearing this, Nick Fury said suspiciously, Pierce has always been a mature, stable and reliable style. Cough. Coulson, who had been standing awkwardly by the side, coughed, and suddenly interjected, I was there at the time. Maybe there was a bit of a misunderstanding. In the elevator, Pierce was very polite. Knowing that Pierce, the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., turned out to be an old jerk in Chen Yun's eyes, Nick Fury could only look at Chen Yun speechlessly, thinking it was a misunderstanding. You'd better put the cosmic Rubik's Cube back first. Nick Fury resolutely chose to skip the topic of Pierce, and persuaded Chen Yun, after a long time, the congressman will find out. Can't you let me study for 2 days? Putting the cosmic Rubik's Cube behind his back, Chen Yun said dissatisfiedly, you know, you are the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now is the critical moment for the development of laser weapons to the second stage. Wiping the cold sweat off his head, Nick Fury gritted his teeth helplessly and said, if you insist, then get it in half a month. Okay, so change it. After thinking about it for a while, Chen Yun nodded, I can study other things for the time being. After speaking, Chen Yun's figure disappeared again, and when he reappeared, the cosmic Rubik's Cube in his hand had disappeared. Instead, it was a weapon with an exaggerated shape. Is that the laser weapon you mentioned? Mazefakel. Wiping off his cold sweat again, Nick Fury shouted angrily, can't you stop? I didn't flip through. Chen Yun waved his hand and said innocently, I only took this one thing inside. Covering his face with one hand, Nick Fury held back for a long time before he could say, thank you. As for poor Coulson, I just think it would be nice if he could teleport too. This way, he doesn't have to be so embarrassed. Since I can make a laser weapon, can you help me make a laser sword? After playing with the gun in his hand for a while, Chen Yun said expectantly, that will be very cool. Can't do it. Nick Fury, who had already resigned to his fate, spread his hands and explained helplessly, because it is unstable, the laser sword cannot be made at all. Then why don't you get Tony Stark to help? He's much better than your researcher. I want to. Nick Fury sighed, he's not short of money, we simply can't reach him. By the way, how did he make his steel suit? Do you want to know? Chen Yun smiled, walked up to Nick Fury's ear and whispered, because he's smart. Glancing at the astonished Nick Fury, Chen Yun said contemptuously, Tony can do it under the surveillance of terrorists. I don't know what your scientists are doing in the luxurious laboratory. After finishing speaking, Chen Yun walked out of the house with a face full of disdain. Wait, leave the hammer. Seeing Chen Yun who was about to slip away with a hammer in his hand, Nick Fury quickly stopped him. Then you take it back yourself. Putting the hammer in his hand, Chen Yun looked at Nick Fury with a half smile. Well, I'd better let you keep it for now. After being stunned for a long time, Nick Fury said speechlessly, anyway, it will be handed over to that crazy Thor in the end. That's not necessarily true, it's an artifact after all. Shaking the hammer in his hand, Chen Yun said with a smile, let's see how much these gods and aliens will pay for ransom. Seeing the back of Chen Yun leaving, Nick Fury was speechless again. After being stunned for a while, he complained to Coulson, this kid, is he so greedy for money that he has started thinking about aliens? Only 6 credits. Why am I locked up here with you for just 6 credits? Looking at the iron walls around him, Darcy Lewis was speechless. She looked at Jane Foster beside her with innocent eyes. I do not know either. Shrugging, Jane looked apologetically at her mentor, Dr. Eric Chavig. Since breaking into this mysterious organization, they have been locked up here. And what is surprising is that this mysterious organization simply ignores them who are locked up here. This situation made the 3 of them nervous to the point of panic. But after waiting for a long time, Jane didn't get anything except Lewis's complaint. Anxious, she could only walk to the only door in the room, and shouted to the agent guarding there, I want to see my lawyer. Facing Jane's protest, the agent didn't even move, and remained at the door expressionlessly. Why do we care about Thor? Lewis complained, he's just a babbler. If he is really a god, then he should have come to save us long ago. As soon as the voice fell, the door of the room was opened, and Thor, the god of thunder, who was full of panic, was pushed in. Thor, are you all right? Seeing Thor, Jane greeted him with a face full of concern. How could something happen to me? Smiling awkwardly, Torkyang smiled and said to the few people who looked at him, at first, he said he would slice me up. These natives, I am the majestic Thor. They could only compromise, they just gave an injection and drew a little blood. After finishing speaking, Thor patted his chest and laughed, those natives even praised my figure. Quote. After listening to Thor's bragging, several people with doctoral and master's degrees looked at each other in blank dismay. After a while, Dr. Eric Savage corrected speechlessly. According to this, you just had a medical examination. God, does he also need a medical examination? Mazefakel. Looking up at Chen Yun who flew away, Nick Fury touched his bald head, and said helplessly, I already knew that he would fly away sooner or later. Coulson nodded enviously, it's so nice to be young. Is this Mazefaker a young thing? Nick Fury muttered something, looking at the place where Thor was being held with unpredictable eyes. This alien who claimed to be Thor vaguely made him feel a little uneasy. It's really handsome. Flying in the sky, Chen Yun only felt comfortable. Although he was taken flying by Thor's hammer, it still allowed him to experience the thrill of flying. But Chen Yun was not happy for a long time. After flying over New York, he realized that he would not land. With a bang, Chen Yun looked like a small meteorite. It fell directly from the sky to the ground, and smashed a big hole in the ground lying on its stomach. Pooh! After spitting out the dirt in his mouth, Chen Yun got up, and after looking around, he realized that he was surrounded by a group of curious pedestrians. My God, it's Batman. Mom, he is so handsome. Batman, Batman. When Chen Yun's handsome face was revealed, he immediately exclaimed. People around took out their mobile phones to take pictures and videos, and even some bold girls rushed towards Chen Yun, wanting to hug him directly. Is this the trouble with fame? Facing the turbulent crowd, Chen Yun shook his head, and quickly activated his teleportation skill. The next moment, Chen Yun appeared at the notary office on the street. Hello, may I ask? The staff at the notary office were also dumbfounded by karma. Batman. Dear Mr. Batman, what can I do for you? Facing the superhero who saved New York, the staff felt their hearts beating wildly, almost popping out. Ah, hello. Facing the excited staff, Chen Yun smiled awkwardly, and at the same time secretly made up his mind that he must wear a three-piece hat, mask, and sunglasses before going out. I'm here to apply for a patent. Taking out Thor's hammer, Chen Yun placed it in his palm and showed it to the staff. No problem, Mr. Batman. The staff said respectfully, please put the hammer on the table. You sure? Chen Yun frowned and said, it's very heavy. Please put it on the table. Seeing the staff persist, Chen Yun gently put the hammer on the table. Boom! As soon as the hammer was put down, the table was crushed and the hammer fell straight to the ground. Seeing this scene, the staff almost fainted from fright. Although he had heard all kinds of rumors about Chen Yun for a long time, when he actually saw it, he couldn't help being shocked. You don't need to lose money, do you? Looking at the scrapped table, Chen Yun was extremely embarrassed. It's okay, no problem. After wiping the cold sweat off his brow, the staff took out a meter stick and a camera. After making a symbolic note, he asked cautiously, may I ask the origin of this hammer? Grab it. Quote. After being dazed for a long time, the staff suddenly came back to their senses, boss. 2 minutes later, the director of the notary office sent Chen Yun away with a smile on his face, and handed Chen Yun a notarization certificate that had already been completed. Your service attitude is really good. Feeling the rocket-like speed of work, Chen Yun nodded in satisfaction. With a flick of the hammer, he flew away in the astonishment of the notary staff. In the air, Chen Yun turned the hammer, and he returned to the town where Thor was discovered. Waiting patiently, the powerful robot I saw in my dream. Why is it even more desolate than imagined? Looking around at the grassland that was almost deserted, Sif, the female warrior of Asgard, asked doubtfully, isn't there a lot of people in Midgard? No matter how large the population is, it's impossible for every place to be rich. Fandral, one of the 3 warriors of Asgard, shook his head, pointed to the small town in the distance and said, There, I heard the whistling of Thor's hammer. Thor, he must be there. Glancing at his companions beside him, Fandral continued, let's hurry up, we need to find Thor as soon as possible. After speaking, Fandral took the lead and walked towards the town. His companion looked at each other for a few seconds and hurriedly followed him. But as soon as he arrived in the small town, Fandral, who was walking in front, stopped, stared at a young man in front of him, and asked cautiously, Thor, why did you change? Looking suspiciously at the extremely handsome young man in front of him, Fandral frowned and looked around, as if to confirm whether he had misidentified someone. But the Thor's hammer in Chen Yun's hand still gave him confidence. Is this how you dressed in Midgard? What? The young man was naturally Chen Yun, who had returned to the small town to wander around. He looked at the strangely dressed people suspiciously, not knowing what these people were trying to do. Thor's hammer. An artifact that only you can pick up. Fandral pointed to the hammer in Chen Yun's hand, and said with a displeased face, stop pretending. Thor, hurry back to Asgard with us, the father of the gods is suffering. Ah! Thor, who was still in shield, suddenly sneezed. At this time, he was locked in an all-metal room, rolling his eyes and listening to his half-brother Loki bragging. First of all, I am not Thor, my name is Chen Yun. Looking at the 3 men and 1 woman surrounding him, Chen Yun shrugged, then patted the hammer on his hand. Besides, this hammer is mine now. What? Hearing Chen Yun's words, the 3 Asgard warriors and Asgard female warriors who came to Earth to look for Thor were stunned. Impossible. Why can you pick up Thor's hammer? Fandral was shocked, and he hurriedly asked, where is Thor? Where is he? Thor, the tramp singer. Chen Yun thought for a while, and then explained, he is probably dating a certain female doctor. As for why I can pick up Thor's hammer. After bumping the hammer, Chen Yun smiled and said, maybe it's because I'm more handsome. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Is our artifact so superficial? For a moment, the faces of several warriors from Asgard were filled with question marks. As for Sif, the female warrior of the fairy palace, looking at Chen Yun's handsome face, she felt a little bit of faith in her heart. Are you a Midgard or an Asgardian? Although he really didn't want to believe it, but Chen Yun did hold Thor's hammer, Fandral had no choice but to doubt Chen Yun's identity. Otherwise, where are you qualified to hold the artifact? Just rely on my certificate. Annoyed by the questioning attitude of these aliens, Chen Yun unhappily took out a brand new patent certificate. What is this? Our Asgard only recognizes artifacts. Asgardians are the real ones. Listening to the 4 people's persuasion, Chen Yun interrupted impatiently. First, here's my hammer. Second, aren't you looking for that stupid sun? As soon as the words fell, Chen Yun's figure instantly disappeared in place. As soon as the warriors of Asgard Palace were alerted, they lost consciousness in an instant. The last thing Fandral saw was Chen Yun pulling out the rope with a smile on his face. It's done, let's send you to the reunion first. After tying up the 4 Asgard warriors, Chen Yun packed them up and dragged them away calmly. You, and you, please come with us. In the shield prison, Jane and Dr. Eric Shavig and his party were called out by agents. As soon as the few people left, the huge room was immediately emptied, leaving Thor alone. Jane, be careful of those people. Thor leaned on the door and looked out nervously. He saw that the agent had taken Jane away, and he didn't seem to have any malicious intentions, but he still worriedly said, they are not good people. How should I escape? Watching Jane being taken away, Thor frowned, and hammered hard on the door made of fine steel, but the door didn't move at all. If I am still the king of the fairy palace, I will lose my divine power. Holding his hair annoyed, Thor murmured to himself in a low tone, there are also Asgard warriors under him charging forward. This prison can't be trapped at all. With a bang, the prison door was opened. The 3 warriors of Asgard and the female warrior of Asgard were thrown to Thor's side neatly. Quote. Are you here to save me? Looking at his subordinates who suddenly appeared, Thor was stunned. Us. Fandral struggled to get up from the ground. He wanted to say something, but finally closed his mouth. It wasn't until he realized that Chen Yun had gone far away that Fandral said to Thor with an embarrassing expression, we're here to find you. You have to go back to the fairy palace with us to save the Lord of the Gods. Save my father. Sighing, Thor sat down on the ground decadently, and said with a desolate expression, Loki has already told me that father is dead. How is this possible? Fandrel's eyes widened, and he shouted to Thor, the Lord of the Gods just fell into a long sleep, he didn't die at all. All of this is Loki's evil conspiracy. Taking a deep breath, Fandrel continued, Loki also stole the Frost Giant's secret box, and incited the Frost Giant to attack Asgard. Now that the Lord of the Gods is sleeping, the entire Asgard has fallen into Loki's control. Loki. Hearing Fandrel's words, Thor beat the ground angrily, and the annoyance on his face couldn't hide. He fooled me. Asshole. I trust him so much. Seeing Thor so angry, the female warrior Sif took a step forward and softly persuaded, Thor, come back with us to save people. As long as Loki's conspiracy can be destroyed, the Father of the Gods will forgive you for the wrong things you committed before. Go back. I have lost Thor's power. Thor shook his head, his eyes full of bitterness. I have lost my divine power, and I am no different from a Midgard. Also, I lost Thor's hammer. Thinking of the hammer that he couldn't pick up but was played with by Chen Yun wantonly, Thor smiled helplessly. Lost divine power, and also lost Thor's hammer. Now he is like a lost dog. The painful Thor made several Asgard warriors clench their fists, and their hearts were also filled with unbearable resentment. As Thor said, even if he was brought back to Asgard, how could he be Loki's opponent without his divine power? The people of Midgard are really strong. Just when several people were at a loss, Sif sighed. She thought of the handsome boy who caught them and was able to control an artifact like Thor's hammer. His strength is indeed terrifying. Hearing Sif's whisper, Fandrel also thought of this. Recalling Chen Yun's formidable strength to knock them out at the same time, Fandrel suddenly felt horrified. Facing Chen Yun, Fandrel even had the illusion of facing the Lord of the Gods directly, making him unable to resist at all. If that boy is also a member of their god race, how could Loki? You have also been sealed up. After a moment of silence, Thor finally regained his energy. He asked Fandrel and the others suspiciously, after all, you were also arrested by those natives. Our divine power is still there. Several people shook their heads, indicating that they had not been banned from divine power. What are you waiting for? Thor stood up abruptly, and said in a low voice with excitement, then let's kill out quickly. Get rid of those natives who dare to imprison us. When we find a way to restore my divine power, we will go back to Asgard and settle accounts with Loki. Us. Fandrel hesitated to speak, but was interrupted by Thor impatiently, what are you waiting for? Are you still afraid of these natives of Midgard? We were defeated by the natives you said. Sif curled her lips and complained, that's the guy who picked up Thor's hammer. Also, our weapons were taken away by him. Thinking of his hammer being taken away by Chen Yun, Thor's chest was filled with anger. Holding back his anger, he analyzed confidently, the person who can lift Thor's hammer must be a descendant of Asgard. When the Frost Giants invaded here before, my father led an army here. Thor told several people about his previous thoughts. After everyone listened, Thor continued confidently, since he is a descendant of Asgard, now is the time for him to repay Asgard. When I see him again, I will use my identity as Prince of Asgard to order him to return to Asgard with us. This is really. Fandrel's lips moved, but he had nothing to say at all. Facing Thor's wishful thinking plan, he could only sigh, not knowing what to say. Believe me. Thor's eyes were confident, and his eyes swept over several Asgard warriors, for Asgard. For Asgard. For Asgard. For Asgard. Thor's confident appearance finally rekindled the hope of several warriors. With his eyes fixed, Fandrel shattered the gate of the prison with his fist. I am the Prince of Asgard. I am a god. Thor took the lead and broke out of the prison directly. Looking at the long-lost scenery, Thor roared excitedly, It's Thor. He yelled at the door for a long time, until the agents surrounded him, and Thor didn't wait for the support of the warriors. Why don't you come out? Thor turned his head in doubt, and looked at the few people who were still in the prison. Well, on your heads is. After seeing the faces of several people clearly, Thor stared at the new swelling on their heads and asked suspiciously, is this a wound? Covering the wound on her head, Sif completely lost interest in speaking, she just pointed behind Thor with her finger. Hello. Hearing the sound, Thor turned his head in doubt, only to see Chen Yun who was smiling. Crazy alien. Chapter 71. Hey, it's you. Seeing Chen Yun, Thor immediately puffed up his chest. As the Prince of Asgard, I order. Ah. Order what? Lifting his foot and kicking Thor back to the prison, Chen Yun asked suspiciously, do you have any other ideas? Thor still wanted to rush up to say something, but was directly controlled by the Asgard four-member group pressing their legs and covering their mouths. Young man, we have no demands. Although the wound on his head was painful, Fandral tried to keep his tone as gentle as possible. Please close the door. Shaking his head, Chen Yun ignored these weak gods and directly closed the prison door. I'm the Prince of Asgard. After Chen Yun walked away, Thor broke free from the shackles of the Asgard warriors. He grinned and rubbed his stomach. He is obviously a descendant of Asgard, but he is still so ruthless. Quake must be broken. Thinking of the hammer that Chen Yun held in his hand all this time, Thor felt very hurt. I am obviously its master, but it hit me with that guy. Asshole, let me out. The more Thor thought about it, the more angry he became. He rushed to the door again, yelling loudly. We have already sent away the three who were looking for the silly sun. Hearing Thor's roar, Coulson walked to Chen Yun's side. They are just a few ordinary astronomers. Glancing at the few people in the prison, Coulson asked awkwardly, how many gods are they after all? Just close it like this, is it really okay? Where are the gods? Smiling, Chen Yun said disdainfully, those who are laid down by me can be treated as ordinary people. Although he was disdainful, Chen Yun was very happy to see Thor and the others being imprisoned. As for why they were locked up, it was naturally because of their superior attitude, and Chen Yun shook the robbed Thor's hammer in his hand, and Chen Yun felt secretly refreshed. It's so much fun to rob gods or something. And with Thor and the warriors of Asgard here, there will definitely be a steady stream of people coming to rescue them. Until then, thinking of this, Chen Yun couldn't help laughing. Report. A giant robot appeared in the direction of the town. Just as Chen Yun was fantasizing about the beautiful blueprint for the future, a sudden report woke him up. Chen Yun and Coulson immediately looked at the agent who came to report. This giant robot came along a rainbow. After listening to the report, Chen Yun and Coulson looked at each other solemnly. Come with me. Knowing the urgency of the situation, Coulson quickly walked towards the parked car on the side. Several black cars drove all the way, and soon came to the location where the giant robot was found. Wow, is this Tony's new armor? Looking at the golden robot, Coulson couldn't help exclaiming, it looks really cool. I am Agent Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D., please show you're valid. As soon as Coulson took out his special agent card, the golden robot fired a fiery laser beam from its eyes. The laser directly burned a car to ashes, scaring Coulson out of the way. Secret Asgard criminals. After burning down the car, the golden robot did not continue to attack, but a gloomy voice came out, you are unpardonable. Sanctions are needed. Destroyer, destroy them. As soon as the words fell, the destroyer's eyes lit up again, and then shot out a crimson laser beam again. Careful. Seeing that the laser was about to hit Coulson, Chen Yun quickly appeared in front of him. Raising Thor's hammer in his hand, Chen Yun abruptly blocked the attack. In the dream, it was clearly Thor fighting the robot. While blocking the laser, Chen Yun wondered in his heart, why is it me fighting against robots now? Having said that, Chen Yun immediately became vigilant. After all, the destroyer in front of him is far more threatening than Thor. After shaking his numb hands from the electric shock, Chen Yun's heart also lifted. Unexpectedly, the laser is still charged. Turning his gaze around the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents around him, Chen Yun began to think deeply. Considering that the war might affect the members of S.H.I.E.L.D., he immediately flashed behind the destroyer. Grabbing the destroyer's neck with one hand, he frantically swung Thor's hammer with the other. As the hammer rushed towards the sky, Chen Yun violently tore the destroyer from the ground. Come with me. With a roar, Chen Yun had already brought the destroyer into the distance. After reaching a deserted place, Chen Yun suddenly let go of his hand. And the moment the destroyer landed, Chen Yun immediately flashed to its side, and directly attacked its fragile joints with a hammer. But the destroyer's defensive power was beyond Chen Yun's expectations. When the hammer in his hand hit the crook of its leg, Chen Yun only felt a huge shock force coming, which made him almost fall to the ground. Realizing that the attack did not cause any real damage, Chen Yun's eyes froze, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Susano. Hearing a shout, when Chen Yun appeared behind the destroyer again, he already had a golden skeleton armor on his body. Compared with the huge golden skull, the originally tall destroyer was much smaller. And when Chen Yun raised Thor's hammer in his hand, the hammer in the light golden skull's hand had almost reached the size of the destroyer. Death to me. With a roar, Chen Yun controlled the golden skull and slammed the hammer on the destroyer's shoulder. Boom. Accompanied by a deafening sound, the destroyer's waist almost changed shape under the attack of the hammer, and his entire body was thrown dozens of meters away. What kind of monster is this? Loki, who had been watching the battle through the consciousness of the destroyer, took a deep breath. He frowned, and subconsciously used his magical consciousness. When this magical consciousness descended on the destroyer, he finally saw the golden skull in front of him clearly. Loki just glanced at it, and a tyrannical aura filled his consciousness in an instant. Annihilate everything. This is the only adjective Loki can think of at this moment. Loki, whose consciousness was shocked, saw the huge steel chopping knife raised by the golden skull before he had time to figure out what was in front of him. Cut. Chen Yun looked at the destroyer in front of him expressionlessly, and dropped his hand holding the Zongdong saber heavily. Boom. Accompanied by a huge roar, the left arm of the destroyer. It was instantly cut off by a huge steel chopping knife. Looking at the severed arm, Loki was furious. He angrily manipulated the destroyer to raise his other arm, and his eyes became red, with deadly lights flickering in them. At the same time, the destroyer's eyes and arms shot out deadly laser rays. The ray drew a strange arc in the air, and the powerful energy filled in it made Chen Yun, who had Wagyu immortal physique, feel jealous. Flash. Sensing the irresistibility of the laser, Chen Yun quickly teleported back. And the golden skull behind him also moved, directly making all the attacks of the destroyer fail. He attacked hundreds of times in a row, and even collapsed the surrounding ground, but was still easily dodged by Chen Yun without any damage. This situation made Loki go berserk completely. The destroyer gave up the attack, picked up the stumped arm on the ground, and after forcibly installing it on his body, it quickly flew away from the place. What the hell? Chen Yun looked at the fleeing destroyer suspiciously, and immediately used Thor's hammer to fly after him. The destroyer is at the front, and Chen Yun is at the back. The two kept turning in circles on the desert. I'll make you regret it. When flying not far from the shield base, Loki sneered and controlled the destroyer to make a sharp turn, turned around and flew towards the base. And Chen Yun behind him, because he could only rely on the clumsy flight of Thor's hammer, was directly thrown away by the destroyer. This hammer is looking for its true owner. Looking at the disappearing figure of the destroyer, Chen Yun shook his head. He could feel the resistance of Thor's hammer to him, and he didn't exert the power of the hammer at all. Divine power. With a sigh, Chen Yun disappeared from the spot immediately. This mortal, I didn't expect him to be so strong. Even the destroyer is no match for him. Controlling the destroyer's rapid flight in the sky, Loki was still shocked in his heart, and he was even worried about being attacked by Chen Yun all the time. Fortunately, Chen Yun didn't show up, and the destroyer arrived at the top of the town smoothly. Thor. As soon as he arrived in the town, Loki found Thor and the others running on the street. Although Loki didn't know why they appeared here, but since he saw this group of people, Loki didn't intend to let them go. Just get rid of Thor, except me. Looking at his brother, Loki showed a cruel smile on his face. No one can take the position of Lord of Asgard anymore. Just when Loki discovered Thor and his party, the Trolls also discovered the destroyer in the sky. It's the destroyer. Thor and the others, who were originally happy to escape from the prison, also realized in an instant that they might have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Loki must be manipulating the destroyer. Realizing that it was an enemy rather than a friend, Fandral immediately asked Thor, "What should we do?" But at this time, Thor also looked blank. He looked around, and his companion didn't even have any weapons in his hands. Are you going to die at Loki's hands? Thor, who knew the terrifying power of the destroyer, fell silent. Fight him. At this moment, Fandral grabbed the electric pole by the side of the road, aimed at the destroyer in midair, and threw it over. Unfortunately, such an attack has no effect on the destroyer at all. Just a casual sweep of his leg, the wire pole broke directly in the air. Among the debris in the sky, Loki controlled the destroyer to slowly descend to the ground. Oh, isn't this the Prince of Asgard? From the mouth of the destroyer, Loki's yin and yang voice came out, why are you in such a mess? He continued in a mocking tone, I almost forgot, you have lost your powers. Now you are just an ordinary mortal. And I am the noble lord of Asgard. Loki said to himself, and the destroyer's arm was gradually raised. When the crimson light on the destroyer's arm began to flicker, Loki's voice sounded again. I, King of Asgard, Lord of Asgard, I declare your death here. As soon as the words fell, a light cannon was fired from the arm of the destroyer. Run. Facing the destroyer, the unarmed Asgard warriors could only flee crazily. Fandral, on the other hand, desperately hugged Thor, who had lost his divine power, and took him together to barely avoid the attack of the destroyer. Humble mortals, accept your own death calmly. Looking at the few people fleeing in embarrassment, Loki laughed wildly, and the arm of the destroyer kept attacking. And when Thor and the others were forced into a corner and were about to avoid it, Chen Yun's figure suddenly appeared in front of the destroyer. The moment he saw Chen Yun, Loki's expression turned extremely ugly, and the majestic destroyer even took a step back in fear just now. Etc., etc. Seeing that Chen Yun pulled out the steel chopping knife again, Loki hurriedly shouted to stop. After thinking for a while, he actually started to explain to Chen Yun, Midgard people, there is a deep misunderstanding between us. Pointing to Thor and the others, Loki continued, they are criminals from Asgard. And I, on behalf of Asgard, came to sign a peace treaty with you. Halfway through the conversation, Loki suddenly realized that Chen Yun didn't seem to intend to listen to what he said at all. Moreover, Chen Yun's gesture of clenching his weapon proved that he didn't seem to intend to talk nonsense with him. Late, spattling in disdain, Chen Yun sneered and raised Thor's hammer in his hand. In the next second, Chen Yun instantly appeared behind the destroyer. Raising the hammer, Chen Yun directly hit the destroyer's head. This time, Chen Yun did not regard Thor's hammer as just a weapon. He tried to use Thor's hammer as an extension of his body, after Chen Yun completely relaxed his mind. Thunder God's hammer suddenly burst into brilliant thunder light, and a destructive ripple exploded from the head of the hammer. Boom! With just one blow, Destroyer's entire body was smashed to the ground, and his huge body was blown backward several times by the huge impact force. Flash! Sharingan twirled wildly in his eyes, and at this moment, Chen Yun didn't hold back anymore. Loki seemed to be aware of extreme danger, but in this situation he couldn't dodge at all. In an instant, the huge destroyer seemed to be Chen Yun's sandbag, being knocked down to the ground continuously. Come on, kill him. Seeing this one-sided battle, Thor ran out happily and turned into a cheerleader. Hearing Thor's noisy roar, Chen Yun stopped attacking speechlessly. He didn't want to be a tool man, he just quietly looked at the destroyer who was about to become a scrap of metal. How do you want to compensate me? Luoji was stunned by Chen Yun's words. But then Chen Yun's cold eyes immediately made Loki panic. I pay. On behalf of Asgard, agree to compensate. Midgard, what compensation do you want? Knowing that Chen Yun can settle the situation with treasures, Luoji put on the Prince of Asgard again. There are not many other things in Asgard, but there are many treasures. Loki's cheap father, Odin, has fought in the universe for thousands of years. Isn't it just a little compensation? 100 or so pieces of treasures are nothing compared to the position of the Lord of the Immortal Palace. It's not what I want, but what you have. But to Loki's surprise, Chen Yun didn't follow the routine at all. Hearing Chen Yun's request, Loki was stunned. He originally thought that Chen Yun would want something useful to him, but not important to Asgard. After all, the other party was just an aboriginal like Midgard. The treasures of Asgard are no worse than Thor's hammer. Loki narrowed his eyes and carefully sorted out the wording, you can make a request with confidence. Oh, Chen Yun was a little moved when he heard that the amount of food is too large. But the nature of a profiteer still made him unable to help looking at Thor. Your younger brother is so open-minded, don't you have to show it as an older brother? As the Prince of Asgard, I guarantee that you can choose any 2 treasures in Asgard. Sure enough, when he set his sights on Thor, Thor couldn't wait to offer better terms. Thor, cursing inwardly, Loki widened his eyes angrily. He didn't expect such a coquettish operation. Although he wanted to stop it, he finally chose to suppress his anger. Thor has 2 items, how about you? Sure enough, Chen Yun took advantage of the situation to raise the price to Loki and said, you can't go below this amount. I'll give out 3 treasures. Loki was speechless, but in order to get rid of Thor, even if he knew it was a trap, he had no choice but to knock out his teeth and jump in. Thor, hearing Loki's asking price, Chen Yun felt secretly refreshed, but turned his head to look at Thor again. 4 pieces. I offer 4 pieces. Thor said his price without hesitation. In his opinion, it doesn't matter what treasure he is. The reality that he would be beaten to death if he didn't bid, made him feel no psychological pressure at all. 5 treasures. Loki gritted his teeth and continued to increase. He already hated the fool Thor. Without divine power, Thor can't go back to Asgard at all, and he can't fulfill his promise. Who said that? I will offer 6 pieces. Before Chen Yun could speak, Thor had already learned to answer quickly. He roared and retorted, as long as Father wakes up, you will get the punishment you deserve. And my divine power will naturally come back. Loki was about to be blown up, he cursed viciously, but didn't continue to bid. Because he already knew that as long as the treasure house of Asgard was placed there, no matter what price he said, it would only be a tie with Thor at most. I can use the entire Frost Kingdom as compensation. After thinking for a while, Loki suddenly called out a new bid. I will use my identity as a descendant of the Frost Giant to lead out the king of the Frost Giant and kill him. Loki smiled sinisterly, with madness in his eyes. At that time, I will give you the Frost Kingdom as a thank you for helping me get rid of Thor. You are not a descendant of Frost Giants. Hearing Loki's words, Thor's face changed instantly. He shouted in disbelief, you are my brother. Brother, I was never your brother. Loki snorted coldly, turned his head and looked at everyone in Asgard. I'm just a proton snatched by Odin from the Frost Giant. Nonsense, this must be a misunderstanding. Thor yelled like crazy. He would never believe that his younger brother, who had been with him for hundreds of years, would be a descendant of the Frost Giant. Odin has already admitted. Loki smiled contemptuously, and mocked, the difference between the 2 of us is the disgusting blue skin on my body. Why are you the future king of Asgard? Loki roared violently, and I'm just a Frost Giant whose background has been concealed. Aren't you talking about compensation? Listening to Thor and Loki's unceasing revelations, Chen Yun couldn't help being speechless. He wondered, why has it become a family ethics theater? You two, since you have such a big conflict. Chen Yun rubbed his forehead, and shouted loudly between the 2, each has 5 treasures, and I can let you settle the conflict. After finishing speaking, Chen Yun went straight to the side, sat down on the bench by the street, and took out a packet of melon seeds from the Shinwei space. Chen Yun directly entered the state of eating melons and watching dramas. Hearing Chen Yun's proposal, the 2 brothers who were still furious instantly calmed down, and fierce sparks burst out from their eyes at the same time. Go to hell. The next moment, the destroyer was dispatched again. Taking advantage of the warriors of Asgard Palace not paying attention, the destroyer swiftly rushed in front of several people. In a moment, several unarmed warriors were thrown to the ground. Our weapons. Covering his injured arm, Fandral frowned and looked at Chen Yun. All the weapons were taken away by Chen Yun, which basically made them lose the possibility of fighting. Loki. When the warriors of Asgard lost their ability to fight, Thor, who could not avoid it, walked directly in front of the destroyer. Careful. Amidst the exclamations of the warriors of Asgard, Thor opened his arms directly to the destroyer. Unarmed, he showed a determined expression on his face. Loki, none of this is your fault. You will always be my brother. To shut up. Angry Loki roared directly. Please spare my friend. Thor laughed miserably. After all, they are also warriors of Asgard. After that, Thor closed his eyes. Boom. A laser cannon directly hit Thor's body, and the huge explosion knocked Thor into the air for several meters. I will not show mercy. Looking indifferently at Thor who fell on the ground, Loki's expression became ferocious and distorted. Stand up. But when Loki really saw Thor lying on the ground without responding, he felt that it was a pity that Thor died, and the destroyer didn't make another move for a long time. Don't really die, you still owe me 5 treasures. Looking at Thor whose life and death were unknown, Chen Yun just wanted to stop Loki from continuing to attack, when the Thor's hammer beside him suddenly flew up. When the hammer flew into Thor's hand, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky and struck Thor directly. The lightning faded, and Thor floated into the air, with lightning flashing all over his body, and electric snakes radiating from his eyes. Thor regained his divine power. Loki. With a loud shout, Thor suddenly raised Thor's hammer. Under the shower of thunder and lightning, Thor is wearing a lightning armor, and the cloak behind him also moves with the wind. What? Thor roared and charged at the destroyer. And the destroyer also roared and rushed over. Just when a fierce battle was about to break out between the two, a leisurely voice suddenly reached Thor's ears. I have a certificate for this hammer, remember to return it to me when you use it up. Certificate. Hearing Chen Yun's words, Thor, who was buried in the charge, was stunned. He was so distracted that he was almost slapped away by the destroyer. Dodging the attack in embarrassment, Thor rejoined the battle with a speechless face. It seems that my dream prophecy is not wrong. Seeing Thor and the destroyer fighting together as in the dream, Chen Yun breathed a sigh of relief. Restoring his divine power, and secretly getting the blessing of Odin's power, Thor is almost like a divine aid. The battle on the field also became one-sided in an instant. In Loki's hands, the mighty destroyer couldn't exert its due strength at all. Compared with Loki, who is not good at fighting, Thor is simply outrageously strong. In just a dozen rounds, the destroyer was pierced through Thor's chest with a hammer. Boom! When the destroyer was defeated, a loud bang shook the town. The huge shock wave directly shattered the glass in the town, and the power was cut off at the same time. These Protoss are indeed very powerful. Looking at the destroyer who collapsed on the ground, Nick Fury, who was attracted by the battle, walked behind Chen Yun. Looking at the huge damage caused by the war, Nick Fury said with fear, there are only 5 people, if they invade the Earth in an all-round way. We simply don't have the ability to resist. Speaking of this, Nick Fury glanced at Chen Yun, who was still eating melon seeds calmly, and finally felt a little relieved. With Chen Yun here, we can still resist 1 or 2. Looking at Chen Yun, the most powerful man on Earth, Nick Fury thought to himself, but if Chen Yun leaves, what should we do? Call. Looking at the destroyer who lost his fighting power, Thor let out a sigh of relief. Before regaining his divine power, he first sensed the call of his father Odin. At the same time as he woke up, he successfully regained his divine power. And the awakened power of Odin also means that he will soon become the real Thor. What a wonderful match! While Thor was meditating, Chen Yun walked over clapping. While praising Thor, he also stretched out his hand. Staring at Chen Yun's outstretched hand suspiciously, Thor asked a little puzzled, this is? Chen Yun spread his hands, since the destroyer has been wiped out, should Thor's hammer be returned to me? This is mine. Thor was speechless. That was in the past, and now it's mine. Calmly taking out the patent certificate from his pocket, Chen Yun put it in front of the confused Thor, this is the hammer's patent certificate. Pointing to the name above, Chen Yun added with a smile, its patent holder is me. You don't want to hack my Thor's hammer, do you? Looking at Thor contemptuously, Chen Yun sneered, is this the only character that Asgard's princes have? You're the one hacking my hammer. Thor retorted angrily, and just about to continue speaking, Fandral stopped him suddenly. Young man, you should return our weapons and equipment together. Now that Thor has recovered his divine power and is still showing great power, Fandral finally has confidence in his heart. Although you are very powerful, it does not mean that you have the strength to challenge Asgard. That's right, return our weapons quickly. With Fandral taking the lead, Asgard warriors stood up to attack Chen Yun one after another. I picked up the hammer on the ground, and I still have a patent. Chen Yun looked at the noisy Asgard warriors indifferently, and your weapons are the tolls you need to pay when passing through the earth. Hey, Chen Yun shook his head and said helplessly, I kindly saved your life just now. Don't say thank you, you still want my weapon. Indigenous, do you want to fight? Chen Yun's words completely angered Thor. Having regained his divine power, even stronger than before, he angrily raised Thor's hammer in his hand. It's not impossible. Seeing Thor raise the hammer, Chen Yun shrugged. Without saying a word, he summoned the golden skeleton that had evolved into a semi-complete body. The 30-meter-high golden skull blocked the sun's light as soon as it appeared on the stage. The black flame attached to the huge giant sword in his hand was constantly burning. How do you want to fight? Floating onto the chest of the golden skull, Chen Yun asked in a low voice with an indifferent expression. At the same time, the golden skeleton behind him pointed at Thor with the giant sword in his hand. I just said, how to fight the ice giant. Looking at the domineering golden skeleton with a ferocious appearance, Thor and the others swallowed at the same time. Even Nick Fury, who has seen the golden skull, was stunned by its super form. Looking at the silent crowd, Chen Yun, who spent an afternoon activating the golden skull into this form, nodded. This is intimidation, Thor thought unhappily in his heart, but he, who didn't want to lose the hammer, finally could only ask bitterly, can I change something? I can exchange something from my father's treasury for Thor's hammer. Isn't it unacceptable? Chen Yun thought for a while, and nodded in agreement with Thor's request. After all, although Thor's hammer is easy to use, the shape of the cross is not so in line with his aesthetics. What other thoughts do you have? After finishing Thor, Chen Yun turned his attention to the Asgard warriors who asked him for weapons. Facing the astonishing oppressive force of the golden skull, the warriors of Asgard would dare not say anything. Even Thor, the high-ranking god, has pulled the switch. Let's talk about weapons and equipment first to save his life. Okay, now that we've settled the deal, let's go to your treasury to get something. Chen Yun put away the golden skull, and walked to Thor's side calmly. How should we go? Speechlessly, he glanced at Chen Yun, and then at the downcast Asgard warriors. Thor had nothing to say for a long time, he could only hold up Thor's hammer aggrievedly. Accompanied by a colorful beam of light descending from the sky, several people disappeared immediately, leaving only a mysterious symbol on the ground. Mazefakel. It wasn't until the tense people left that Nick Fury wiped the cold sweat off his brow, and at the same time looked at the place where Chen Yun and his party disappeared and complained, what kind of shit is this? Hey, shaking his head, Coulson sighed and said, our shield has arranged so many things here. Is it just for soy sauce? How could it be soy sauce? Nick Fury pointed to the messy town, smiled and said, call your agents and take that big robot to the headquarters. This thing has great research value. You mean, the robot that was taken away by Chen Yun? Coulson glanced at Nick Fury cautiously, and told the whole thing before he got angry. When Chen summoned the golden skull, he had already taken the robot away. Mazefakel. Luxury. It's too luxurious. As soon as he arrived in Asgard through the Rainbow Bridge, Chen Yun's eyes were attracted by the glittering golden picture in front of him. At the transfer station of the Rainbow Bridge, countless gears made of gold are constantly turning inside the house. These golds are bathing in the sun and exuding golden light. Looking at the room full of gold, Chen Yun couldn't help swallowing, wishing he could knock off a few gears and put them into the Shinwei space. But seeing the Asgard warriors around him staring at him all the time, Chen Yun had no choice but to let go of this thought. Sif, are you all right? A voice suddenly came from the corner, waking Chen Yun up from his dream. Looking along the voice, it was a person who looked like an ice sculpture who spoke. The one who spoke was a burly man. Through the ice on his body, it could be seen that his whole body was covered with golden armor. The most eye-catching thing is the two huge long horns on his helmet. The man's eyes were closed tightly in the ice, but if you observe carefully, you can find that he still retains the breath of life, and he can still speak. Elder brother. Asgard female warrior Sif rushed up. She held the man's big ice-like hand, and asked tremblingly, are you? When Sif melted the ice on his body with divine power, the man opened his eyes, revealing a pair of all-seeing eyes that could see through people's hearts. Scanning the surrounding environment slowly with his eyes, the man said slowly, Loki attacked me with the frost box. Loki. Thor's eyes were fixed, and he stared closely at the man. Heimdall, are you sure? After a long silence, Heimdall replied with a wry smile, I'm sure. Hearing what Heimdall said, Thor frowned and rushed out. As soon as he got outside, he stopped in his tracks. Because the corpses of the two frost giants were lying sideways outside the house. In Thor's ears, he could already vaguely hear the sound of fighting in the distance. The frost giants have invaded Asgard. Looking at Thor, who was already burning with anger, Heimdall begged weakly, at the moment when the Lord of the Gods is sleeping, Asgard can only rely on you. Frost giant. Loki. Ah! Thor roared and rushed directly towards the distant palace. For Asgard! For Asgard! The three warriors of Asgard shouted slogans and followed closely behind. Even Sif, who was worried about her brother's safety, nodded to Heimdall and rushed out. That's all gone. Watching the backs of Thor and the others gradually disappear, Chen Yun really wanted to stop them and ask when the promised treasure will be delivered. But thinking that they were fighting for their own country, he could only resist the idea of asking for debts in advance. Heimdall, who was still full of cold, nodded friendly to Chen Yun, and Chen Yun also nodded in return. One was unable to participate in the battle because he needed to protect the Rainbow Bridge, and the other was the village owner who came to ask for a bill. The atmosphere between the two was extremely awkward. Here, well, do you have a guide? After waiting for a long time, Chen Yun couldn't help but ask politely. Now that he has come to Asgard, the kingdom of the gods, Chen Yun definitely wants to go around more. If you come across a wild artifact, wouldn't you be making a lot of money? Young man, we are now fighting the ice giants. Heimdall was speechless after hearing Chen Yun's words. He was a little confused. Couldn't this young man hear the sound of fighting in the distance? There were no tour guides during the war. It seems that the tourism industry in Asgard is not very good. But what made the corner of Heimdall's mouth twitch was that Chen Yun's words didn't seem to stop. No matter how good-tempered Heimdall was, he never thought that the friend Thor brought back would speak so irritatingly. He pointed to the battlefield, and said in a blunt tone, "You can find a guide on the battlefield by yourself. I think they'd welcome you to Asgard." Okay, Chen Yun nodded, then turned around and walked towards the place where the fighting sound was the loudest. Call. Finally, Chen Yun was sent away, and Heimdall heaved a sigh of relief. He patted his tense muscles from the cold, and continued to stand on the Rainbow Bridge. Prevent the enemy from taking the opportunity to take the Rainbow Bridge because it is unguarded, thus putting the whole of Asgard in crisis. But soon, Heimdall was dumbfounded looking at Chen Yun, who turned around. They're just too busy. Chen Yun scratched his hair, and said helplessly, busy to single out, fight in groups. Do you have any tour guides who have been to the battlefield? That way, I can let him take me around the battlefield. You can wait until the war is over, and I think I can find you a good guide myself. Heimdall sighed, and then pointed to the tallest palace in the distance, or, you can go there and find a powerful person as a guide. Don't bother me anymore, I need to observe the movement of the frost giant. After finishing speaking, Heimdall closed his mouth, and stood beside the Rainbow Bridge without saying a word, his all-seeing eyes staring into the distance in a daze. Are all the people in Asgard so indifferent? Chen Yun curled his lips. Let's go to bed first, and then ask for the bill after the fight. A wooden door was summoned casually, and Chen Yun lay down on it. Space magic. No, could it be creation? Heimdall was stunned. He looked at Chen Yun suspiciously, but finally let go of his curiosity, chose not to pay attention to Chen Yun, and continued to patrol the battlefield and the frost giant with his all-seeing eyes. I'm making money. I don't even know how to spend it. After a few hours of silence, a loud noise suddenly sounded in the silent room. Heimdall frowned and glanced, but fell silent again. Comfortable, stretching, Chen Yun sat up from the wooden door. Turning off the phone's ringtone casually, he looked at the time and found that it was already 12 o'clock in the evening of Earth time. Sign in. Ding, sign in successfully. Congratulations to the host for getting today's ability. Strong identification technique. Strong identification technique. Looking at this newly obtained ability, Chen Yun blinked. What's the use of this? He turned his head and asked Heimdall, who had been pretending to be cold, are you strong? The strong. Heimdall was stunned. He thought for a long time before slowly shaking his head. I'm just a gatekeeper. It makes sense, no wonder you put horns on your head. This is armor. Symbol of bravery. Just as Heimdall was about to refute, he saw Chen Yun, who was still there, disappeared in an instant. Space magic. Under the watchful eye of Heimdall's all-seeing eye, Chen Yun flashed uninterruptedly, and in an instant he was on the distant battlefield. He actually mastered high-level movement magic. And, no need to chant. Knowing this, Heimdall was shocked. Loki, why would you? In the hall where Asgard's throne was placed, Thor yelled at Loki angrily, why did you bring the ice giant to Asgard? My dear brother, look at you now. Loki leaned against the wall with his arms folded, and there was still a trace of joke on the corner of his mouth. Where is your princely demeanor? Now you are like an enraged beast. To shut up. Thor's eyes were red, and he threw the Thor's hammer in his hand at Loki. But the next moment, the hammer hit a piece of air, and Loki's figure had long since disappeared from the spot. You're always so restless. Walking out from behind the pillars of the main hall, Loki chuckled and mocked, Asgard and you, neither can stop the attack of the ice giant. Holding up the strongest weapon in Asgard, the eternal spear by his side, Loki said coldly, only I can save Asgard. Asshole. Thor suddenly raised his head and stared firmly into Loki's eyes. No matter what you are planning, I will stop you. As soon as the words fell, Thor's body suddenly flashed with thunder, and a tyrannical aura filled the entire hall. The two immediately fought fiercely, and with the eternal spear, Loki tied with Thor for a while. While the two were fighting, Laufey, the leader of the frost giants with an army, had already set foot on the territory of Asgard. My children, kill those Asgardians. Destroy Asgard. Kill, kill, kill. As 100,000 frost giants poured into the battlefield, the position that 10,000 Asgardian warriors had fought for hours to defend was lost in an instant. Hurry up and send the wounded here. In the center of the battlefield, Frigga, the mother of the gods, stood there, releasing the healing magic in her hands continuously. Seeing the two suns killing each other in the distance, and the frost giant right in front of her eyes, Frigga felt physically and mentally exhausted. Asgard needs a new king to replace the old me to protect Asgard. Odin, sleeping in the ice coffin, looked at the chaotic Asgard through his consciousness. He didn't expect that Thor and Loki would fight openly and secretly because of just one throne. The two people who were fighting for life and death made Odin feel extremely sad. Withstand. Frigga desperately rescued the soldiers who were frozen into ice cubes under the attack of the frost giants, and at the same time shouted the battle command, we can't keep defending, we must take the initiative to launch a counterattack. The bad battle situation has made Frigga very anxious, but as a commander, she can't show it, so she can only release healing magic to disperse the frost on the field. It's really lively. When the two armies were fighting fiercely, Chen Yun's figure appeared above the battlefield. Landing on the wall of the holy city, Chen Yun waved to the bloody soldiers beside him, everyone, please stop. Susano. After waving his hands for a long time, the red-eyed soldiers around him ignored Chen Yun at all, so Chen Yun had no choice but to summon the golden skull. The huge golden skeleton directly occupies the entire city wall. Compared with it, the burly frost giant has become a pocket dwarf. As soon as the tyrannical golden skull appeared, it immediately attracted the attention of both sides. Who are you? Facing Chen Yun, who was not dressed in Asgard, the frost giant Laufey did not immediately order an attack. Instead, he raised his ice blue arm, pointed at Chen Yun and shouted, leave quickly, or you will become a piece of ice. On the other side, Frigga also carefully looked at the golden skeleton that suddenly appeared on the battlefield, and at the same time worried in her heart whether Chen Yun was an enemy or a friend. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your battles. Seeing that he had become the focus on the battlefield, Chen Yun shrugged, I just came here to test new abilities. Then, Chen Yun looked around the battlefield left and right, which one of you is the real strong? Your skeleton is very strong. Laufey smiled disdainfully, and then pointed to the frost giants on the battlefield, but we frost giants are the real powerhouses. Under the iron hooves of the frost giants, no creature is vulnerable. Really, I don't believe. Chen Yun shook his head, then looked at the surrounding frost giants, then let you prove it and see who is the real strong. After speaking, Chen Yun closed his eyes. Appeared suddenly, like a magic stick Chen Yun. The fierce battle stopped immediately, and the frost giants all looked at Chen Yun, wondering what Chen Yun was going to do. Even the Asgardian fighters who were at a disadvantage, look around in a daze. What is filial piety? What is love? Feel the greatness of maternal love. Accompanied by Chen Yun's soft singing, his eyes suddenly opened, and a bright golden glow bloomed in his pupils. Several beams of light hit everyone who saw Chen Yun's eyes in an instant. What is this? Before Laufey had time to think, his stomach swelled rapidly. A huge pain swept through his whole body in an instant, making Laufey howl terribly. And those ordinary frost giants and Asgardian warriors covered their stomachs one after another, and fell to the ground with pained faces. Only the truly strong can resist the identification of the strong. The shoddy weak will experience the pain of 10 seconds of pregnancy and half an hour of childbirth. Note: the childbirth effect cannot be eliminated. Hearing the system reminder in his ear, Chen Yun was immediately stunned. Then look at the majestic frost giants and mighty Asgardian warriors who fell around. Chen Yun's face was covered with black lines. Is this the legendary eye of pregnancy? The kind that gets pregnant just by staring at it? Regardless of Chen Yun's surprise, it was really miserable for the frost giants and Asgardian warriors who just glanced at Chen Yun. Their stomachs swelled up one after another, as if something was about to burst out. Most of them were male fighters, and in just 10 seconds, their bellies were as big as a bucket, as if they were pregnant in October. And just 10 seconds later, before they could catch their breath, they felt the pain of childbirth again. Waves of severe colic swept through their bodies, making them almost suffocate. But this is not over yet. From time to time, the abdomen will suddenly generate a huge tearing force. The heart-piercing pain immediately made them burst into tears. The entire battlefield was filled with their cries. What kind of magic is this? Looking at the 3 Asgard warriors and Sif who were also writhing in pain on the ground, Frigga's eyes widened in surprise. She tried to use healing magic on Sif, but got no response. Too strong. It turned out to be a magic that can affect the entire battlefield. Aware of the horror of this magic, Frigga's eyes showed envy. What the hell is going on? There is a loophole in the expert identification technique that Chen Yun doesn't even know about. Its activation is not limited to time and space. Heimdall, who was far away from the battlefield and only took a sneak peek with the all-seeing eye, was also directly hit. At this moment, Heimdall's stomach was swollen into a big bag. He clutched his stomach and curled up on the ground, bean-like sweat dripping down his forehead. I shouldn't have seen him. Heimdall, who was regretting, hadn't reacted when a figure broke into the room. Quietly, what a poor person. It was Loki who came, and because the war was stopped by Chen Yun's ability, Loki also ended the fierce fight with Thor. Heimdall, what's wrong with you? Looking at Heimdall who had completely lost his resistance, Loki showed a treacherous smile on his face. He reached out and snatched the golden sword from Heimdall's hand, and put the sword in his palm. The key to the Rainbow Bridge is really exciting. Loki played with the golden sword lightly, while on the other side, Heimdall could no longer control himself. The swelling pain in his stomach made him lose consciousness. What the hell did you do? Flooded with pain, Laufey, the leader of the frost giants, questioned profusely, what kind of magic did you use on us? Looking at the frost giants lying on the ground and howling, Laufey was shocked. The ability to make himself and the entire army under him fall into the trap in a second is simply shocking. Fortunately, the eye of pregnancy will not make people actually have children. Looking around, Chen Yun realized that almost all the frost giants were lying on the ground. Except for a few scattered frost giants who were at a loss what to do, the army had already turned into pregnant women. If you're really pregnant, then. The 2 armies fought, but tens of thousands of children suddenly appeared out of thin air. The picture was so beautiful that Chen Yun didn't dare to think about it. Because they were far away from Chen Yun, only half of Asgard's warriors suffered from pregnancy. The remaining warriors all gathered in front of Frigga, the mother of the gods. While the frost giants are subdued by magic, shall we? Seeing that the frost giant had lost its fighting power, an Asgardian warrior squeezed to Frigga's side, and smacked his hand over his throat. No, it's definitely not Asgard's way to kill everyone. Frigga shook her head and rejected the warrior's proposal. Although she hated the frost giants, she still had a bottom line in Asgard. 100,000 frost giants. But the problem before us is that Asgard's cell can't hold frost giants. Only get rid of the chief evil. After thinking for a moment, the benevolent Frigga still came up with a solution: let Laufey pay the price he deserves. As for the other frost giants, find an open space and temporarily imprison them. Following Frigga's words, this anticlimactic war is over. As for the rest, let the king of the gods worry about it. What if these frost giants really give birth to children? At this point, another Asgardian warrior asked a question. This question made it difficult for Frigga, who was still strategizing just now. Frigga, who didn't know what to do, walked towards Chen Yun. Hello, young man. After seeing Chen Yun, Frigga showed a kind smile on his face. For this strange and strong man who directly affected the trend of the battle, Frigga used her highest etiquette. Faced with Frigga's kindness, Chen Yun nodded. Jumping off the golden skull, Chen Yun arrived in front of Frigga. This hero is the benefactor of Asgard. When Chen Yun appeared, the soldiers in charge of guarding Frigga subconsciously raised their weapons. Waving to signal the soldiers to retreat, Frigga asked, "I don't know what to call you, a strong stranger. Where are you from? And, will they actually have a baby?" The three questions Frigga asked one after another made Chen Yun embarrassed. Chen Yun originally intended to test a new ability, but he didn't expect it to cause such a big commotion. "I'm from Earth, you can call me by my name, Chen Yun. I met Thor on Earth, and it was he who brought me to Asgard." With an embarrassed smile, Chen Yun explained, "As for these people, they are just experiencing the feeling of being pregnant. Not really having a baby." After speaking, Chen Yun stretched out his hand. Experience. Hearing this answer, Frigg was relieved. 100,000 frost giants is enough for them to worry about. If you add another 10,000 babies, it will become a nightmare for Asgard. However, Chen Yun's outstretched hand still stunned Frigga, who was not familiar with handshake rituals, for a moment, but she finally shook it. "That's good. I'm afraid they're really going to have a baby." After realizing that things won't get any worse, Frigga's expression obviously relaxed. She said in a relaxed tone, "I didn't expect Thor to make friends like you on Earth." Hearing Frigga's words, Chen Yun only felt more embarrassed. Facing Thor's mother, he was really embarrassed to tell the cause of the incident. "Is he going to tell Frigg that I have come here to ask for a debt from your son?" After thinking and thinking, Chen Yun decisively chose to change his words. "Thor and I are good friends. Really, it is Thor's honor to have you as a friend." Although Chen Yun's face was a little weird, Frigga didn't pay too much attention to it. She smiled and said, "I never thought that the reckless Thor would be able to make friends with a supreme mage from Earth." Supreme mage. Chen Yun looked at Frigga in bewilderment, wondering why she gave herself such a title. "Well, I'm not the supreme mage." Chen Yun shook his head, trying to correct Frigga's misunderstanding. Bald heads are not Chen Yun's favorite for the time being. If it wasn't the supreme mage, how could you have such powerful magic power? Frigga was a little puzzled, and she asked in confusion, "Could it be that there is something wrong with my perception?" While the two were talking, the warriors of Asgard were also orderly tidying up the battlefield. The war belonging to Asgard has ended with the arrival of Chen Yun, and their task now is to tie up the frost giants who are incapable of fighting one by one. This war, which was still at a disadvantage, was suddenly won easily, and every soldier's face was filled with joy and gratitude. Just as the battlefield gradually subsided, a loud noise suddenly came from the rainbow bridge in the distance. As soon as the loud noise fell, Odin forcibly woke up from his deep sleep, rolled up a brilliant divine power and flew straight to the rainbow bridge. "Great! The Lord of the Gods is awake." Amidst the cheers of the soldiers, Frigga also beamed with joy. But soon, fearing that Loki would be punished, she felt a touch of sadness in her heart. "I always feel that something bad will happen." Looking at Odin rushing past in the air, Chen Yun frowned, feeling an ominous premonition in his heart. Here is Thor's bedroom. Along the way, Frigga entertained Chen Yun with the highest Asgard etiquette. After learning that Thor did not place Chen Yun, the mother of the gods went out on her own and took Chen Yun to tour the palace. Finally, when they arrived at a luxurious palace, Frigga arranged for Chen Yun to live here. When everything was arranged, Frigg clapped her hands again, and the two beautiful girls walked into the palace. Seeing the handsome Chen Yun, the tense girl's cheeks instantly turned rosy. After saluting, they retreated to Frigga, and stood there looking at Chen Yun shyly and expectantly. "If you have any needs, you can tell them to do it. I don't think I need such a service." Looking at the shy girl, Chen Yun reluctantly rejected Frigga's offer. For him who was still a pure boy, the first time he was pure, he only wanted to leave it to the one he loved. Chen Yun's refusal did not embarrass Frigga. She smiled without changing her expression. "If you need anything, just call me." After that, Frigg left with the two disappointed girls. The next thing is to wait for Thor to fulfill his promise. Chen Yun heaved a sigh of relief after seeing off the enthusiastic Frigga, and turned around to visit the luxurious palace. Loki destroyed the Rainbow Bridge. In another palace, Odin woke up and had a long talk with Frigga, who had returned. At this time, Odin has long lost the majesty of the previous Lord of the Gods. Instead, he looks like a sad old man, with a face full of sorrow, and sorrow, he fell into the abyss. What? Hearing the news, Frigga was shocked and saddened. The destruction of the Rainbow Bridge was nothing more than a trivial matter to Asgard. But the unknown of Loki's life and death made her truly heartbroken. Although he was not his own, but years of upbringing made Frigga regard Loki as his own son. That boy Loki, gods be upon him, bless him to survive. After a long silence, Frigga sighed, with tears in his eyes. By the way, Thor's friend. Packing up her sorrow, Frigga mentioned Chen Yun. I arranged him in Thor's bedroom. I have learned from Torna everything that happened to him on Earth. Odin shook his head, and said worriedly in a low tone, Thor has not grown to the point where he can support the throne of Asgard after all this hard work. The children are still very young, you should give them more patience. Patting Odin on the shoulder, Frigga comforted him. Maybe I'm too impatient. Odin nodded first, then shook his head and said with a wry smile, but we don't have time. In my deep sleep, I saw the dusk of Ragnarok. I don't have much time, Frigg. Odin stood up and walked to the window with his hands behind his back. Frigga was left alone on a chair, weeping in shock. My death is inevitable. Sighing, Odin said solemnly, unfortunately, the current Thor can't take on the heavy responsibility. If I die, our eldest daughter Hela will be released from hell. By then, she will destroy the whole of Asgard. Hearing Hela's name, Frigga was stunned, and after a while, she asked tremblingly. Hela, how is she doing recently? She's getting crazier. Odin frowned with an ugly face and said, perhaps, imprisoning Hela was the biggest mistake I made in my life. Thinking of Hela, who had followed him to fight in the Nine Realms since he was a child, Odin felt extremely sad in his heart. Just because he thinks that a warlike tyrant is a wrong behavior, he stops the pace of war. This caused Hela's dissatisfaction, and thus, Hela, who was ambitious to conquer the universe, launched a protracted struggle with Zeus. In the end, Odin became the one to ban his own daughter. And the female war gods who belonged to Hela also left Asgard one by one. If Hela is still there, if the goddess of war is still there, how dare a mere frost giant break into Asgard? Thinking of this, Odin's eyes suddenly dimmed. Hela, our daughter. After learning that Loki might lose his life, Frigga began to miss Hela even more. Can you, let me go see her? Wiping away the tears from the corners of her eyes, Frigga begged Odin, I haven't seen Hela for thousands of years. She's been imprisoned for so long. Odin looked at the sad Frigga with complicated eyes, and persuaded him earnestly, now, no matter who appears in front of her, she will do extreme things. For your safety, I won't let you see her. Lord of the gods, you are too cruel. Seeing Odin's non-negotiable attitude, Frigga shouted angrily, I haven't seen the sun for 1,000 years, even you would be crazy. Sorry, I'm not a qualified father. Odin took a deep breath, and said in a hoarse voice, I caused all this, and I'm sorry for our children. Seeing Odin blame himself so much, Frigga's excited mood gradually calmed down. After a long silence, she suddenly raised her head and asked, what do you think of Chen Yun? I can't see through his fate. Hearing Frigga's question, Odin fell into deep thought, and nodded after a while and said, but from him, I see the power that can change the future of the universe. Frigga looked at Odin in surprise. She was very surprised that Odin, who always had his eyes above his head, would praise Chen Yun so much. If Hela is allowed to marry Chen Yun. After lowering his head and thinking for a moment, a gleam of light flashed in Frigga's eyes. Is this the way to bring Hela back to normal? Ridiculous. How could Hela? Hearing this proposal, Odin instinctively wanted to refute. But soon, Odin was stunned. After a while of silence, Odin agreed with a weird expression, this may be Hela's last chance. What? The Rainbow Bridge is broken. Early the next morning, Chen Yun, who had just woken up, learned the bad news from Odin. The Rainbow Bridge is the only bridge that can freely travel through the 9 kingdoms. And its damage also indicated that Chen Yun would not be able to return. Warriors from Earth, please don't worry. Seeing Chen Yun's anxiety, Odin explained with a smile, Rainbow Bridge is not the only way to travel through the universe. There is a way to get you back to Earth quickly. Pointing to the sky of Asgard, Odin continued, although it will be a little dangerous, if you can pass through the interlayer between Asgard and Earth, you can find your way home. And that road is also called by us Hell. Hell. Hearing Odin's words, Chen Yun was stunned. What is hell like? Looking at Thor, who arrived in a hurry, Chen Yun asked curiously, will it be the same as what is said in the book? I'm not so sure either. Thor scratched his head, recalling the materials he had read. I only know it is dangerous. After finishing talking about the scales and feathers he saw in the information, Thor slapped Chen Yun on the shoulder. I know all about your feats on the battlefield yesterday. Too strong, 100,000 frost giants are pregnant together. Speaking of this, Thor said happily, fortunately, I wasn't there, otherwise, I would have experienced having a baby there with a big belly. Looking at Thor's burly body, Chen Yun uncontrollably thought of the scene of Thor crying with a big belly. Vomit. As soon as he thought about it, Chen Yun felt a chill, and quickly dispelled this disgusting thought from his mind. In order to thank you for bringing peace to Asgard, the Father has promised to open the treasure house of Asgard to you. Glancing at Odin, who walked silently to the window, Thor whispered a piece of good news that made Chen Yun happy. Not only can you take away the promised treasure, but you can also choose one of his private collections to take away. It's not a reward, it's a debt you should pay. Glancing at Thor, who was proudly asking for credit, Chen Yun responded lightly, you know, I saved your life. Ha ha ha. Thor smiled awkwardly, touched his head and said embarrassingly, to thank you, you will be my brother from now on. This kind of thing can reflect our true friendship. I admire your beard. Chen Yun looked at Thor, who was trying to get away with his emotions with contempt, and said in a low tone, it can get out of such a thick skin. Of course, as a warrior of Asgard, I have always. After speaking halfway, Thor suddenly realized that he was at a loss for words, and could only look at Chen Yun with a resentful expression. Unable to withstand Chen Yun's eccentricity, Thor walked away dejectedly. As soon as he arrived at the temple, he was stopped by Frigga. What, you mean? When Thor learned about Hela's proposal from Frigga, he was completely stunned. Looking at Thor, who was screaming, Frigg quickly covered his mouth. This matter must not be leaked in advance. Dragging Thor to the corner, Frigga warned him with a serious face. As soon as the croaking Thor left, the room fell silent again. Secretly looking at the extremely handsome and tall Chen Yun, Odin actually developed a mentality of a mother-in-law looking at her son-in-law. Seeing such a handsome spouse, even Hela will be happy. The more he looked, the more satisfied Odin felt. Going back to Earth through hell, what happened? Seeing that Odin was silent, Chen Yun, who had been thinking about what happened to Hel, spoke up. I will tell you about this in detail later. Odin did not answer this matter directly, but said to Chen Yun, let's go to the treasure house of Asgard to choose treasures first. After speaking, Odin took the lead and walked ahead. Treasure. Hearing that he could receive treasures, Chen Yun immediately forgot about Hel. He followed Odin's footsteps, turning around in the palace complex. Through several secret passages and countless traps, the two arrived at the door of the treasure house. The moment the treasure house door opened, a dazzling light immediately illuminated Chen Yun's cheek. My God! The dazzling brilliance made Chen Yun close his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was completely stunned. In the treasury, there are many heart-stopping gems, golden weapons and equipment, and even many magic scrolls that constantly exude a magical atmosphere. These treasures are all Frigg's favorite. Sighing, Odin said helplessly, to Asgard, they are just common things. Even if you are the lord of the gods, is it really okay to show off your wealth like this? Looking at the dazzling array of treasures in the room, Chen Yun looked at Odin of Versailles with a speechless face. Let's go, follow me to the next floor, that is the real treasure house of Asgard. After speaking with a smile, Odin continued to lead the way, preparing to take Chen Yun to the next level of the treasure house. But when he was walking halfway, Odin suddenly stopped and asked, pretending not to care, by the way, I don't know if you have a girlfriend yet. I'm only 17 years old. Difficult to look away from the treasure, Chen Yun shook his head casually and said, I don't have a girlfriend yet. That's really good. Hearing that Chen Yun didn't have a girlfriend, Odin's eyebrows immediately raised 3 degrees. You are this. Looking at Odin, who was overjoyed because he didn't have a girlfriend, Chen Yun asked confusedly, is there any problem? Oh, I'm just a little pity. Odin smiled awkwardly, and explained in a blunt tone, I just hope that you can choose your partner carefully in the future. Seeing that Chen Yun was still looking at him suspiciously, Odin continued patiently, compared to you, who have a long lifespan, the lives of people on Earth are too short. The best choice is to find a partner who can accompany you for a long time. After speaking earnestly, Odin immediately changed the subject, pointing to a huge box in the treasure house and said, that box is a box of jewelry specially packed by Frigga to thank you for defeating the frost giant. That's not good. Upon learning of this matter, Chen Yun quickly waved his hand and refused, I just made a small contribution. Before he finished speaking, Chen Yun opened up his divine power space. You can put it in here if you insist. Very good space magic. The inappropriate Chen Yun directly made Odin laugh. He stretched out his hand to signal Chen Yun to take it easy, and then praised, Frigga also mentioned to me your powerful magic attainments. It's just normal. Smiling, Chen Yun didn't have the ability to explain. His mind is completely occupied by that box of jewels. Then, I'll take it. Rubbing his hands nervously, Chen Yun had already flashed to the location of the treasure chest. Haha, you can even take a little more. Blinking at Chen Yun, Odin laughed, and continued mysteriously, jewelry is what women like best. With these jewels, if you meet a woman who is stronger than you in the future, you can give these jewels to her. How do you feel? There is a trap here. Hearing Odin's weird words, Chen Yun was speechless. Could it be that this lord of the gods was even more outrageous than Thor, who was out of tune when he was young? Odin, the lord of the gods, did he suffer from some kind of illness while he was sleeping? But no matter what Odin thought, Chen Yun was very happy. If it wasn't for the embarrassment, Chen Yun would have emptied all the diamonds and jewels in the treasury. In the end, he managed to control his desire with difficulty, and only half of the inventory in the treasury was reduced. It's almost there, if there is more, it will be a little. Looking at the treasury that was much empty, Chen Yun showed a satisfied expression on his face. This trip to Asgard has really benefited him a lot. Not to mention the mountain-like piles of precious stones in the Shinwei space, just the priceless diamonds, gold jewels, and the frighteningly large number of antique works of art have far exceeded his original expectations. Now that we've chosen it, let's go to the next floor. Odin didn't show any concern about Chen Yun's greed for money. Instead, he showed a slight smile, as if this was the property Chen Yun deserved. Odin waved his hand, and the ground began to descend. After descending to a certain height, Odin waved again, and all the lights came on. The space on this floor is obviously much smaller, and the number of treasures has also become scarce. But at the same time, the entire treasure house is even more gorgeous than before. Whether it's the oil paintings on the walls, the precious gems inlaid on the inner walls, or the dilapidated treasures adorning the surrounding walls, all of these exude an amazing luxury atmosphere. Taking out any of these treasures in real life can cause scrambling or even fighting, but here, they are used as decorations and embedded on the wall. The real highlight is the dozen or so treasures placed in the center of the room, shining with colorful brilliance under the bright lights. Even Chen Yun, who had seen countless treasures just now, couldn't help but a gleam of heat flashed in his eyes. Which one do you think is suitable? Seeing the hotness in Chen Yun's eyes, Odin smiled kindly and said, choose whatever you want, you're welcome. Looking around in the treasure house, Chen Yun was immediately attracted by a glove in front of him. The whole body of the gloves is golden, exuding a golden texture under the light. The most eye-catching thing is the 6 gems inlaid on it. Colorful gemstones are inlaid in the knuckles of the gloves. Infinite gloves. After seeing the appearance of the glove, Chen Yun was instantly shocked. Isn't this an artifact used by Thanos to plan birth for the universe? How could it appear here in Odin? What is this? There is such a big killer hidden in the treasury. Chen Yun looked at Odin in puzzlement. Touching the infinity gloves, Odin smiled and explained, these gloves are my dream when I was young. At that time, I was still a fanatical war criminal. As if recalling the past battlefield, Odin's eyes became complicated. At that time, my thoughts were naive. Collect all 6 infinity stones and snap your fingers to kill all life in the universe. And then create a brand new universe without rebels. Thinking of this, Odin couldn't help sighing, this idea is very naive. I made these gloves, and then sealed them here. Childish, doesn't it realize your idea? Pointing to the shocking 6 infinity gems, Chen Yun was puzzled. He knew the power of infinity gems. With this artifact, Asgard will almost become the strongest force in the universe. Not to mention the frost giants, even if they meet the famous celestials, they have to leave something behind. The gloves are true, and so are the legends. Smiling awkwardly, Odin explained with a wry smile, unfortunately, these infinite gems are fake. In order to commemorate the gloves made by the dwarves, I specially made fake gems. If it's true, it's amazing. Knowing that the infinity stones were fake, Chen Yun quietly breathed a sigh of relief. The current him is simply unable to resist these cosmic-level extraordinary items. Fortunately, these things are just fakes, and they are not offensive. Infinity gems are really rare. Sighing, Odin said with regret, except for the Rubik's Cube on Earth. Only the cosmic overlord Thanos and the current supreme mage each have one. As for the remaining 3, even I don't know where they are. Cosmic Rubik's Cube. Even Odin knew about it. Thinking of this infinity gem placed in the safe by S.H.I.E.L.D., it is well known in the universe. Chen Yun gasped. The infinity stone is in hand, but has no ability to protect it. This is simply the worst news. But after thinking about it, Chen Yun was relieved again. Now the shield has him, even if he is not a strong opponent at the universe level for the time being. But as long as he grows up smoothly, even if Thanos comes to Earth himself, he will have to beat him to change his name to Dad. After Chen Yun regained his senses, Odin began to introduce other treasures. Picking up a crystal-like ball, Odin introduced, it can dispel illusions and false darkness, and it also has the ability to predict the future. The name of the artifact is called the Warlock's Eye. Touching the blurred light beam emitted from the Warlock's Eye, Odin reminisced, it is a gift from a supreme mage. After a pause, as if he was afraid that Chen Yun would be confused, Odin patiently explained, the supreme mages are the guardians of the earth. They maintain the magical world of the earth and prevent the dark world from invading reality. Putting down the Warlock Eye, Odin pointed to the artifact next to him. Eternal fire, the core of the flame giant, no matter where it is placed in the universe, it will never go out. The box of ice, the artifact of the frost giant's kingdom. Without it, the frost giant, who is still able to fight the universe, can only linger in his own country. The ball of Egmata, a treasure handed down from generation to generation by the supreme mage. The supreme mages. Did you rob the supreme mage? Hearing several treasures passed down from generation to generation by the supreme mage one after another, Chen Yun asked in surprise, why are there so many artifacts here? The previous supreme mages are all my good friends. After explaining something like Versailles, Odin smiled and introduced the last treasure. Life Shield, the sacred object of Atlantis. Touching the obscure writing on the shield, Odin sighed, I can't understand the writing on it, so I don't know its function. Looking at the shield nostalgically, Odin said regretfully, the civilization of Atlantis is really too advanced. If they don't disappear, there is simply no room for us. After introducing the treasure without changing his face, Odin's heart was also bleeding. Daughter Hela, sons Thor and Loki. None of these 3 people is a fuel-efficient lamp. After struggling for thousands of years, these dozen or so treasures are already his last possessions. Which one do you want to choose? Thinking of Hela, Odin finally asked with a smile on his face. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.